Rescue crews are now in the fourth day of searching for a 92-year-old hiker missing in Allegheny State Park. As News 4's Nelina Shapiro reports, rescuers hope a new description of where he was last seen will help their cause.
Hamilton got lost in the park on Wednesday while hiking with his 66-year-old daughter, Rebecca Huffman. When Hamilton was too weak to continue, his daughter walked to safety the next morning and called for help. On Sunday, she came back to the park and handed police this picture she drew of a mysterious concrete structure. Police say Hamilton was last seen about 100 feet from this structure. But here's the problem. Right now, officials can't find it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode. This time, we invite you to join us as we discuss some of the absolute strangest missing person cases that we've ever encountered. These stories are beyond strange and mysterious. None have any rational or scientific explanation, yet, according to those that experienced them, they actually happened. So sit back, relax, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you have theories on any of these? If so, please share. We'd love to hear them. Missing 92-year-old and the mysterious structure nobody can identify. On November 10, 2010, 66-year-old retired nurse Rebecca Huffman and her 92-year-old father, Reverend Thomas Hamilton, got lost while hiking in the Allegheny State Park. They walked for miles through dark woods, climbed up hills on their hands and knees, and were freezing cold. The very next day, Rebecca walked to safety and called for help. She stated that her father was too weak to continue, so she told him to stay put and not move. Search and rescue was immediately deployed to the area, and there was no sign of her father, Thomas. The next day, Rebecca came back to the park and handed police a picture she drew of a mysterious concrete structure about 6 feet in width and about 15 to 20 feet wide. It was a 3-foot-high structure that you can walk into and be standing on a rock-like floor. Thomas was last seen about 100 feet from the structure. But there was a huge problem. Officials were never able to find this mysterious structure that his daughter Rebecca described. A massive 8-day search conducted by hundreds of volunteers, police officers, firefighters, and K-9 units over 5,000 acres of the park turned up nothing. Strangely enough, 2 years later, his remains were found 500 feet from where the search and rescue crews started their official search. The mysterious structure has never been located. Linda Ortega and the people hiding in the bushes. On September 22, 2012, Linda Ortega and her brother Eddie Huff set out for a day's hiking in the Arkansas Ozarks. The area in which they were hiking was an area that they both frequented. However, during their hike, Eddie suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar area. Eddie looked up through the trees, hoping to find some degree of positioning from the mountains around them, and when he looked beside him, Linda had simply vanished. When Eddie eventually returned home, he seemingly had no memory of what had happened in the park. A search party was sent into the forest to find Linda, but with winter temperatures beginning to set in and having left with barely any supplies at all, hope was fading fast. Linda would reemerge from the forest almost a week later. She appeared shocked and unnerved by whatever incident had unfolded and led her here. She would later claim, although the details were murky at best, that she came across people, but when she asked for help, they'd act like they didn't hear her. Linda says she remembered them looking right at her and not saying a thing. These people were hiding in the bushes, she says. They were following me but would not help me. In addition, Linda stated that dark figures appeared in the forest at dusk. They were like silhouettes that moved through the trees, but no matter how much she screamed, they couldn't hear her. She said they constantly watched her, but never acknowledged her calls for help. Linda said that she was just glad that the forest had finally released her. Casey Hathaway and the bear. 3-year-old Casey Hathaway disappeared from his great-grandmother's backyard on January 25, 2019. Casey was playing with 2 other relatives in his great-grandmother's backyard the day he went missing. When he didn't come inside when the others did, his family started searching for him. After 45 minutes passed, his grandmother called 911.
Okay, and what's going on there?
We lost my 2-year-old grandson that's walked in the woods back there and we can't find him. 3-year-old grandson.
Okay, so who's there with them?
His little sister.
You say his 3-year-old?
Yeah, he's 3.
Okay.
The girls come to the house and left him there and he's walked off somewhere and we can't find him.
Okay, but you're not there at the house now?
I'm at the house, yeah.
Okay, and how long ago do you know he walked in there?
It's been at least 45 minutes, because we've been looking all in the woods for him.
And it's behind your house? Is it directly behind your house?
Yeah. Well, on the side, yeah.
Is he a white, black?
He's white.
Do you know what he was wearing?
Probably a black little coat.
A black coat?
Yeah.
Okay. Does he usually do this?
Huh?
Does he usually do this?
No.
Was he wearing pants?
Yeah, he had pants.
Was it jeans?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And you said about 45 minutes to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Is it a big area of woods behind your house?
Yeah, it's pretty big.
I think you've been out there looking for him?
Yes.
What is it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we got a deputy headed to you, okay? And you said 45 minutes directly behind your house or side?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, if you see him, let us know. We have some deputies headed that way, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
He was walking in the woods back there and we can't find him, his great-grandmother told the 911 dispatcher. The other ones came through the house but left him there and he walked off somewhere and we can't find him. Search and rescue teams from across the state immediately came together to brave the treacherous terrain and low temperatures, hoping to find Casey. 3 days later, rescuers were still combing the woods when they heard the missing 3-year-old boy call out for his mother. In the emergency room, Casey started talking about what happened in the woods. He said he had a friend that was a bear. The bear took care of him and kept him warm while he was lost in the woods. Casey goes on to say that the bear also fed him berries. Now, the local sheriff stated that there are bears in the woods of Craven County, North Carolina, but there's no evidence to prove one was with Casey. He goes on to say, all that matters is that something was there to comfort Casey during the 3 days he was missing. Stephen Kubacki, missing for over a year. One February morning in 1978 near Lake Michigan, student Stephen Kubacki would venture out to indulge in several hours of skiing. However, when he still hadn't returned the following day, a huge search was put in motion. Strangely and ominously, footprints were discovered at a location where the student claimed to be heading. And what's more, they stopped right at the frozen water's edge. There was no sign of any markings on the frozen surface of the water, and no signs that the ice had been broken anywhere. Later that day, Stephen's skis and backpack were discovered. However, no other sign of Stephen came to light, and the searches were eventually called off. His family, while not giving up hope, were prepared for the worst. Then, over a year later, in early May 1979, Stephen would appear out of the blue on his parents' doorstep. He had very little memory of where he had been. He had awoken earlier that day in a field in Pittsfield, hundreds of miles from where he disappeared, and around 40 miles from the family home. Even stranger, he was wearing clothes that weren't his and had a strange bag of maps with him that he didn't recognize. Rather than compensate himself financially with the many offers from media people for his story, he instead retreated from the public, refusing to speak of the incident, of which he claimed he had no memory, and not wishing to undergo such things as hypnotic regression, as he wasn't experiencing any psychological problems and wished to keep it that way. Ambrose Smith, gone for 24 hours. Ambrose Smith normally played happily at home in Newaygo County, Michigan. But on October the 8th, 2013, Ambrose was sitting in the lounge with her father when he briefly left the room, and upon his return, she was nowhere to be found. A massive search involving hundreds of volunteers was immediately activated, covering the entire surrounding area. It wasn't until the next day that Ambrose was found a few miles from her home. Strangely, she was discovered in a location that had been extensively searched the previous day. How the little girl had managed to traverse such a huge distance and evade the search teams who sprang into action so soon after her disappearance remains a complete mystery. Zen Rong vanished while piloting an aircraft. On March 15, 2016, Zen Rong flew out of Ann Arbor in a 1984 Cessna 172P owned by the Michigan Flyers. When it was overdue to return, authorities were notified and the wreckage was found in a forested area near Manitowage, Ontario, northeast of Munising, over Lake Superior. The downed Cessna he had been flying was found in a densely wooded area in Ontario the same day he rented the aircraft from a flying group at the Ann Arbor airport. But Zen was not at the scene of the crash, and there were no footprints in the snow to indicate that Zen was in the aircraft at the time it crash-landed. All the evidence indicates the aircraft was operating normally and crashed because it ran out of fuel. Authorities have theorized that at some point prior to the crash, Zen must have exited the aircraft while it was in the air. Searches around the crash site and along the route that the aircraft was known to have traveled were searched, and yet nothing was found. Another search was conducted in the Petoskey area where Zen's cell phone last pinged, but again, nothing was found. Zen Rong was an experienced pilot who was also a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. His whereabouts are still unknown, and his case remains a mystery. Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. In this episode, we'll be looking into some cases of couples who mysteriously vanished together. So come with me. Let's walk and see. First up, we have Camden Sylvia and Michael Sullivan. On the evening of November 7, 1997, 36-year-old Camden Sylvia and her boyfriend Michael Sullivan, 56, left the Manhattan loft they shared together to go for a nice quiet jog. The couple were artists and lived in a rent-controlled building, getting their loft at a steal for only $300 a month. Try to find that in Manhattan. They were, by all accounts, a very kind and loving and happy couple. They had a routine of going out for a nightly jog together, and the night of November 7th, 1997 was no different. Later on, video surveillance would show the two of them visiting a nearby video store together, renting a movie. However, this footage would be the last time anyone ever saw or heard from the pair, as it seems as though once they left the video store, they walked right off the face of the earth. It wasn't until several days later that people started to realize that no one had heard from either one of them, and even neighbors thought it strange that they weren't seen coming or going at any of their usual times. Camden's mother visited the loft in order to see what was going on, and she found that, aside from the couple's pairs of jogging shoes and Camden's tote bags with one set of keys to the home, all of their personal possessions and worldly belongings were left behind and seemingly untouched. It didn't look like anything was amiss, and there were no signs of struggle at all in the small loft. It actually looked like one or both of them would be coming right back through the door at any moment. Their bank accounts and credit card records were searched right away, but they hadn't been touched. There didn't seem to be a single clue or shred of evidence to give any idea as to what could have possibly happened to the pair. Once the investigation started, though, upon speaking with the other tenants in the building where the couple lived, the investigators came across some rather disturbing information about the landlord, a man named Robert Rodriguez. Robert was rather hated by the tenants and was accused of randomly and without any notice, and also illegally, as it was a rent-controlled building, trying to raise the rent of all the tenants in the building by what was described in several sources as an exorbitant amount. He also threatened that if anyone refused to pay this new increased rent, he would simply turn off the heat in the building. This was a rather significant threat due to the fact that this was New York City in the wintertime, and it was bitterly cold outside. The tenants in the building told Robert that they would withhold all rent should he carry out this threat about the heat, and on the day of their disappearance, Michael personally handed him a petition signed by everyone in the building about a rent strike if the rent was raised. Michael is said to have been the one to initiate the petition as well. Initially, it's said that Mr. Rodriguez was extremely cooperative with investigators. He even invited them to search the entire complex without complaint and offered anything else they might need from him as well. He denied having anything to do with the disappearance, and nothing of value was found during the initial search. However, this seeming cooperation wouldn't last very long, as shortly after the investigation started, he himself was reported missing, and the police were unable to find him. His family refused the police access to his property in Orange County, New York, upstate from where the loft the missing couple lived in. Police had a kind of way around this refusal, though, as they didn't have enough for a warrant, but they went ahead and flew helicopters over the entire home and property and used infrared cameras to look for any bodies. However, nothing was found there either. Meanwhile, the investigators tore up the entire floor of the loft as well, looking for any evidence at all to either connect Robert to the crime or to find out if just anything nefarious in general had happened there, but this was to no avail. Nothing was found, and the police and the victims' families were at a loss. What could have happened to these two perfectly normal people who went out to do a perfectly normal thing on a seemingly perfectly normal night in New York City? They didn't simply evaporate, did they? Cadaver dogs in the elevator picked up no scent either. As all this went on, the police couldn't shake the suspicion that Robert Rodriguez definitely was hiding something and thought he most likely did have something to do with the couple's disappearance. However, they could find no evidence or proof. The prevailing theory was that the disputes over the raising of the rents and the heat issue had perhaps gone too far when Michael handed him the petition. It's posited that Robert flew into a rage and made them disappear. Robert remained missing throughout all these searches, and all the while, wild conjecture and rumor flew around his name and his family. The police even went as far as sending divers into a nearby lake to search for the bodies of the missing couple, but, as with every other attempt at finding Camden and Michael, nothing was found and nothing more had ever come of it. Making this disappearance and the suspicion on Robert Rodriguez even more sinister was the fact that he was a suspect in yet another disappearance. A man named David King was an associate of and a co-defendant in a lawsuit of $13 million against Robert Rodriguez back in 1991. Not long after they had a heated argument, David King simply vanished without a trace. Though suspicion was always on Mr. Rodriguez, as with the case of Camden and Michael, there was never any evidence found against him. He was never formally charged in any of these disappearance cases. He reemerged 2 weeks after initially going missing during the investigation, but he did so with a lawyer in tow and no longer wishing to cooperate at all with the police or speak to the press. He was eventually arrested on completely unrelated charges, which included tax evasion, credit card fraud, and money laundering. He was also later charged with identity theft and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was released, though, in 2004, and to this day there's no evidence against him in either disappearance, and no credible leads or even any evidence has ever been found to implicate Robert Rodriguez or anyone else in the disappearance of Camden Sylvia and Michael Sullivan. Next up, we have Christopher Mittendorf and Christina Branham. On July 27, 2006, 21-year-old Hardin County, Tennessee resident Christopher Mittendorf left his home to go shopping with his 17-year-old fiancée, Christina Branham. Neither of the two were ever seen or heard from again. The couple lived with Christopher's mother at the time of their disappearance, and she is the one who reported them missing. Later on that same day, when she returned home, she noticed that her son and Christina had purchased some new clothing, which she saw laid out on their bed. She couldn't find the two of them anywhere and alerted the authorities. From the beginning, there wasn't much to go on, and in this case, it wasn't until 5 days later that their car was found, apparently abandoned, on the side of the road approximately 50 to 60 miles away in a very rural area. While only one of their cell phones was left behind in the vehicle, the other phone was going straight to voicemail and had been since the time they were thought to have disappeared. A witness came forward and claimed she saw the couple climbing into a white car and drove off with whoever was in it. They did not seem, at least according to this witness, to be under any type of stress or duress. There were no clues or leads aside from this one, though, and the case very quickly went cold. As she went through her son's belongings trying to find anything that might explain his disappearance, Christopher's mother found a lockbox in his room that contained items belonging to an alleged career criminal named George Bogus. Christopher's mother wondered if her son and his fiancée possibly stole the items belonging to Mr. Bogus and unwittingly made themselves a target of this allegedly very dangerous man. Before the police could launch any kind of real investigation into this theory, George Bogus' wife murdered him. This happened in 2010, and then there was no chance of ever really knowing what happened to the young couple. The pair remain missing to this day, and the case is completely cold. Next, we have Claude and Martha Sue Shelton. On May 21st, 1971, 27-year-old stay-at-home mom and homemaker Martha Sue Shelton, called Sue by those who were closest to her, and her husband, a 37-year-old man named Claude, whom it's only said in the report that had 10-plus years employment at his job, whatever his job was, tucked their 3 children into bed and told them they would be going to meet up with some friends to go and get a late bite to eat at a nearby truck stop. The couple left their home at Jerry's Trailer Park, which was located on 18th Street in Corbin, Kentucky, at around 2 in the morning, and headed to King's Truck Stop to meet their friends. The truck stop was only 5 miles from their home, so it shouldn't have taken them very long to drive there and back, and they shouldn't have been gone long at all, as they were only planning on having a quick bite to eat. Despite this, however, they were never seen or heard from again. Their daughter, Sheila, said she remembers her father asking her mother if she wanted to come with him or wait at home, and that her mother had agreed to go. Now, the first odd thing that comes up in this case is the fact that, according to Sheila, her parents first took all the money they had stored in a jar in the house, totaling about $600 before they left. Now, to me, that's a huge sum of money to bring with you if you're only grabbing something to eat at a small-town truck stop. They drove a white 1967 Ford Galaxy, and the owner of the truck stop, who was familiar with the Sheltons and their children, said he never saw either Sue or Claude, and he also never saw their vehicle there that night. Everyone close to them agreed that they would never abandon their children, and for this simple fact, something horrible had to have happened to them. In actuality, almost everyone interviewed who was close to the couple said the trip in general was extremely odd and out of character, as it was very much unlike Claude and Sue to leave their children unattended at all. The truck stop, the area surrounding their home, and some nearby woods were all searched thoroughly, but no sign of the couple ever turned up. There's no more relevant information on this case, and Claude and Sue Shelton remain missing, and the case is still cold to this day. And now we have Danielle Imbo and Richard Patrone. At the beginning of 2005, Danielle Imbo was a 34-year-old single mother of an 18-month-old son who was going through a divorce when her best friend from high school, Christine, reintroduced her to Christine's brother, an old high school crush of Danielle's, named Richard Patrone. The two hit it off immediately, but it seems as soon as they did and things were starting to look up for the couple, Danielle's ex-husband and father of her son suddenly started reaching out and trying to rekindle their relationship. Danielle was understandably confused, as on the one hand, she was thinking about keeping her family together for her son, and on the other hand, she remembered they were divorcing for a reason. Finally, stressed out and unsure of what to do, unable really to make a decision, Danielle told both men she needed space and time to herself. She decided she would be best off just focusing on being the best mother she could and working and raising her son. 5 weeks later, on February 19, 2005, Richard called Danielle and asked if she wanted to come out for a drink with him, just as friends. There were some bands performing locally that he knew she liked and thought she would appreciate hearing them play live. Danielle was in need of a night out, and so she agreed and met up with Richard and his friends Anthony and Michelle on South Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. With Danielle and Richard both supposed to be picking up their kids the next morning and not wanting to be too tired, they mutually decided to call it an early night after the bands were done playing. At approximately 11:45 p.m. that evening, they said goodbye to Anthony and Michelle and walked out of the bar. Not only were they never seen or heard from again, but Richard's vehicle, a 2001 black Dodge Dakota, was also never found. The Philadelphia and New Jersey police and the FBI have spent the last 17 years in search of even a single clue as to what could have happened to the young friends and the lost vehicle. Everyone involved wondered how not only could two people seemingly just disappear the way these two seemingly did, but how did a 3,000-pound vehicle simply dissolve as well? It just didn't make any sense. It was suggested as a possibility that they had some sort of accident and went off the road and into the Delaware River. Despite multiple vehicles being found in the river during the search, none of them belonged to Richard Patrone. Those closest to them said that neither would give up their children and just abandon them like this unless something terrible happened to them. Their cell phones have been off since the time of their disappearance, and neither one's bank account or credit cards have been touched. Authorities did receive a lead involving Danielle's estranged husband, who it is said exchanged threats with Richard over the phone multiple times while he and Danielle were dating for that brief period. Nothing ever came of their investigation into him. However, there has been a lot of tension between Danielle and Richard's respective families, as it confused many as to why Danielle had told Richard she didn't want to be with him anymore, and yet still agreed to meet him for drinks and to listen to music just 5 weeks later, even if it was just as friends. There's no evidence to suspect either foul play or fault on anyone's part. Danielle and Richard's disappearance remains an open case to this day. Anyone with any information is urged to please contact the Citizen Crime Commission's tip line at 215-546-TIPS or 8477. Callers do not have to give their name, and there is a $50,000 reward for information that leads to finding Danielle and Richard or the arrest of those person or persons responsible for their disappearance. Now up, we have Mitchell Weiser and Benita Bickwood. On July 27, 1973, 16-year-old Mitchell Weiser and his 15-year-old girlfriend Benita Bickwood, whom he had met at her workplace in Narrowsburg, New York, planned to hitchhike to a concert and festival in Watkins Glen, a town 75 miles away. They were given their first short ride by a trucker and were last seen together hitchhiking on State Route 97. After this, though, their fate is unknown, and nobody's even sure if they ever made it to the concert. Initially, the authorities in charge of the case thought it most likely that the young couple had simply decided to run off together, but their families vehemently deny that they would ever do such a thing. A witness named Alan Smith came forward in the year 2000 with some information that took the case on a very interesting turn. Alan claimed that after that same concert, he hitched a ride on a Volkswagen bus and had met and spoken with two teenagers he was pretty sure were Mitchell and Benita. He claimed that the bus had stopped and everyone got out to go swimming in some river, but that Benita had gotten into some trouble in the water. And after Mitchell dove in to save her, they were both swept away, and everyone else on the bus just took off and went on with their lives as if nothing had happened. The driver of the bus did say that he would call the authorities on the very next stop, but there's no record of any call ever being made in regards to this somewhat bizarre case. While authorities don't technically completely discount what Alan Smith had to say, they do find it unsettling that he waited 26 years to come forward, and that allegedly nobody had made any attempt to help the couple at all. Alan, who obviously, at least according to his alleged story, seems to have seen the entire thing go down. Regardless of what the authorities or anyone else believes, just in general about Alan Smith's very delayed alleged confession, there's no evidence to back up what he said, and therefore the case is still unsolved to this day. No evidence has ever been found as to what could have possibly happened to this young couple, and it's as though they simply were here one minute and gone the next, with no reasonable or rational explanation, or really any explanation at all, as to what could have possibly happened to them, other than the story that Alan Smith told. Did they indeed make it to the concert, perhaps, and run into trouble there? Were they hitching their way home when they ran into some issue or possibly foul play? Or did they possibly go missing before even reaching their destination? Without any way to verify Alan Smith's 26-year-old story, it's all just a bunch of unknowns at this point. And the family hopes and prays that someday they will have the closure they so rightly deserve. Lastly, Sheila and Connor Dwyer. Our final case is considered to be one of Ireland's most baffling missing persons cases in the entire history of their country to date. On April 30th, 1991, an elderly married couple named Sheila and Connor Dwyer attended Mass at St. Patrick's Church in the town of Fermoy, and seemingly vanished from the face of the earth right after. On May 18th, after not hearing from them for weeks, Sheila's sister went to the couple's home to see that everything was all right. It was quite uncommon for her sister to have gone this long without reaching out to her or anyone else in the family for that matter, and when nobody answered the door at the residence, she went ahead and notified the authorities. The police showed up soon after and broke the door down. However, there was no sign of the couple. There was no sign of forced entry or struggle or robbery in the home, and all that was missing was the couple and their car, a Toyota Cressida. The couple's clothing and glasses were still there, as well as a large amount of cash that was stashed in a tin. The house was very secure, which is why the authorities had to break down the door in the first place. It honestly appeared on all fronts as if the couple were simply planning on attending Mass and returning straight home. Strangely enough, it wasn't long before investigators discovered that this wasn't the first time one of the Dwyers had up and vanished without a trace. Turns out that sometime in the 1980s, Connor had gone missing for a couple of years, and upon his return provided no information at all as to where he'd been and what he'd been doing. He also never told anyone why he'd gone for so long without contacting everyone. It seems this was a mystery everyone who knew him had just accepted as something Connor did and moved on from it. Now, 30 years later, and neither Connor nor Sheila have ever returned, no one ever heard from them again, and there are no clues or evidence whatsoever to even point investigators in a direction as to what could have happened to them or where they could have ended up. To this very day, this is one of Ireland's most baffling, frustrating, and enduring unsolved disappearances.
Now, how can someone just disappear without a trace? How could they be here one minute and just poof, gone the next, seemingly erased right out of existence in the blink of an eye? Now, we see that a lot on this channel in a lot of these videos, and we may never know the answers to these questions. But for 5 families in San Francisco a few years ago, these questions became a part of their everyday lives and continue to haunt them. I'm sure the frustration of not knowing, the desperation of needing answers, that's got to be almost too much to bear. Here are their stories. The first of what some call either the California Five or the San Francisco Five to go missing was Jackson Miller. Jackson went missing on May 17, 2010. His vehicle was found abandoned near the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Although there was no note indicating that he meant any self-harm found in or near the vehicle, neither were his keys there. Due to his struggle with major anxiety and depression and the fact that, at the time of his disappearance, Jackson was being prescribed medications to help with these issues, but was not taking them anymore, many people, including Jackson's family and loved ones, thought he had almost certainly and tragically jumped to his demise. Despite no body or evidence to confirm this theory ever being found, this was what not only the family, but the authorities and even the public assumed happened to Jackson. He was only 1 month shy of his 20th birthday and living in Cupertino, California at the time. It's been 11 years now since that fateful day in May of 2010, and the family still have no answers at all. His mother stated, "We've been sad and incomplete since Jackson left. There's always been a slim sliver of hope he's alive. We both always held out hope that he was out there, but honestly, we flip-flopped back and forth because of the amount of time, and just not being able to imagine why in the world he wouldn't call us if he was out there. It's just a huge mystery for us." There was a possible sighting of an encounter with a man claiming to be Jackson in March of this year, 2021. A woman smoking a cigarette outside the Target in Woodland, California, claimed a man she didn't know approached her and asked if she could give him a ride to Sacramento and if he could bum a cigarette. The woman said she declined to give him a ride, and when she did, he allegedly asked if she would call him an Uber and stated his name was Jackson and he was a missing person. Surveillance footage from the Target store captured something a little strange regarding the man. He entered the store wearing shorts and exited a few minutes later wearing black pajama pants with green shamrocks on them and a dark green sweater. Another business owner in the area, who is yet unnamed, also contacted the Santa Rosa County Police and reported seeing a man who she believed to be missing person Jackson Miller hanging around in the parking lot of her business and trying to bum cigarettes and a ride to Sacramento. She claimed he left the premises, however, when no one would help him. Authorities claim they have reviewed both the target footage and the footage from the second business, but haven't disclosed publicly yet if the young man was in fact Jackson Miller or if the tips were even viable. No word on what the family says about the images publicly released of the young man in Target. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's investigators would only say, "The Sheriff's Office is aware of the missing person case of Jackson Miller. Detectives are currently in communication with the Woodland Police Department. At this time, this is still an ongoing investigation, and detectives are currently using all leads to locate Mr. Miller." Now, notice they didn't say to try and locate Mr. Miller. But as of right now, however, there have been no more information released on whether or not the young man in question is indeed Jackson Miller. He is still officially a missing person and possible jumper. The next young man to go missing right around the same time and in the same area of California was 29-year-old Cameron Rimmer. According to his father, Cameron traveled to San Francisco with $30,000 in cash to start a medical marijuana business. He was staying at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco when he was last seen. He had flown there on September 29, 2011. He had bought 60 to 70 packages of the drug with the money he had brought with him. But it's unknown how many people knew how much cash and marijuana Cameron had on him during this trip, or who he was going there to meet. He was supposed to return home on October 30th, but never showed back up. The last known contact with Cameron was on October 6th, when he called a friend who lived in Arizona and asked him if he would pay for another night at the hotel with his credit card, and Cameron would pay him back at a later date. The friend said he would, but before he had the chance to, Cameron called him again and told him not to worry about it because he had found another place to stay for free. No one ever heard from Cameron Rimmer again. This was also the last activity on his cell phone, according to the police who checked his phone records and pings through the course of the investigation. On the day he disappeared, he left all of his cash and his marijuana checked with the bellman of the hotel, along with his personal belongings and luggage, but never returned to pick up any of it. He hasn't used any credit or debit cards, checked his email, or used any forms of social media since his vanishing either. Rimmer was unmarried with no children at the time of his disappearance and had lived in a few different cities across the state of California previously as well. Cameron did have some mental illness, mainly bipolar disorder, which he had been in the past hospitalized for. The medication he was required to take for this condition was left behind with his belongings the last day he was ever seen. It's also reported he had sustained several head injuries in the past. This is important because without medications and possible, even if mild, brain damage, Cameron could have had some kind of episode and simply wandered off. There have been several reports in the years after his disappearance of him being spotted unkempt and with long hair throughout the San Francisco area, but none could ever be substantiated. At the time of his disappearance, he was 29 years old, Caucasian with blonde hair and blue eyes, and his nickname was Cam. Despite all the maybes and possible sightings, Cameron is still officially listed as an endangered missing person. Just 2 months after Cameron Rimmer seemingly vanished without a trace, so did a 23-year-old musician named Sean Tyler Dickerson. Sean was living in San Francisco at the time, but working towards moving to New York City with a friend. The night before he went missing, Sean had stayed up talking with a friend and his roommates until 4 a.m. When he woke on the morning of December 2nd, 2011, he realized he had overslept. He was rushing out the door at around 11:30 that morning, explaining to his roommates he was going to be late for work. Sean never made it to work that day and was never seen or heard from again. It's worth mentioning, however, that his not arriving at work that morning wasn't that worrying in itself. Sean worked at a men's clothing store, and just the day before, on December 1st, Sean had never come back to work from his lunch break and had only contacted his boss later in the day to explain why. His boss told him he didn't want to work with him if he was going to be unreliable, doing things such as working a half day and never coming back from lunch. Sean's ex-girlfriend reported he had left all of his personal things and belongings behind in his room, in the house he shared with 5 other people. None of them have ever seen or heard from him either. Sean is considered officially endangered missing, and unfortunately his loved ones have no additional information or answers as to what could possibly have happened to him. Next, on February 7th, 2013, Christian Michael Hughes was in San Francisco on the third day of a trip he'd taken from his home in Sacramento to visit a friend. He was supposed to be back home that day by 2:30 p.m., but he never made his flight. The friends Christian was staying with said he had packed his things around 1 o'clock that morning and left. He has never been seen or heard from again. No one knows where Christian was meaning to go when he left that morning, or even why he decided to do so. He had no other friends in the area and no access to a vehicle. He also had very little money on him. There has never been an explanation given as to why Christian had decided to leave this friend's house so early in the morning. His mother has since come forward and said she has some concerns about his mental health due to his father having passed away right before his disappearance. She also said he'd had health problems, but what she meant by this is unclear as well, just as the circumstances surrounding his vanishing. While the police have stated publicly they do not believe there was any foul play involved in Christian's case, there just isn't enough information made available to the public for most people to understand why they said this. The circumstances are a bit strange to say the least, and without an explanation as to why he left so early or where he was going, it's hard to come to any kind of reasonable conclusion. He'd had several surgeries in the months prior to his disappearance and has unspecified medical conditions. There's been no new information on this case since the initial reports and coverage in the first days and weeks of the event, though just like in all the other cases, his family and loved ones are still desperately searching for answers and the truth about what happened to their loved one. Finally, the last of the San Francisco Five to go missing was Sean Seedy. On May 21, 2013, Sean Isaac Seedy went to visit an old high school teacher on the 100 block of Oak Street in San Francisco, California. He left his house at 11:40 in the morning and spoke to his father from his cell phone around 1:30 that afternoon. He told his father he was taking the bus to the local park and would be home later on that day. His phone seemingly went dead a half hour later at around 2 p.m. and was never charged or picked up again. Sean was never seen or heard from again either. Several months before his disappearance, Sean suffered a severe and traumatic brain injury due to an accidental fall. Because of this, he never left the house for extended periods of time and kept in frequent contact with his parents on the rare occasion he did leave by himself. He is in desperate need of his medication and is considered medically fragile as well. Even the slightest bump on Sean's head could lead to severe brain damage or even death. Even without these things happening, without continued medical care for the conditions he's already suffered, he will die. Sean had braces on his teeth and is biracial, half Asian and half Caucasian. His left arm and wrist were in a black splint at the time of his disappearance as well. His right eye is slightly drooped and he has many scars on his head and neck, as well as titanium screws in his left wrist and head. There is little to no more information about where Sean could have possibly gone and or where he could have ended up. There's also little to no information about the police investigation of this disappearance, at least not that has been made public. Though all these cases seem to have only one common denominator on the surface, if you look a little deeper, you'll see most of them had some form of mental illness, and 2 out of the 5 had suffered traumatic head injuries. Surface things like having the same name could even factor in. I know many people, including investigators, don't believe any of these cases are connected, let alone all of them, but in this community, with what we know, we should be very uncomfortable with clusters of missing persons like this. They were all young men and hadn't yet turned 30 at the time of their respective disappearances. Could this be a new pattern of some kind? Something along the vein of the so-called smiley face killer theory? Or are the abductors possibly involved, just getting smarter and the men aren't being found so easily? These are questions we would be remiss not to ask, but we must also remember to be respectful of the families, some of whom may not want to hear such things. Hello, friends. In this video, we're going to be talking about the disturbing Pacific Crest Trail disappearances and deaths. Pacific Crest Trail, commonly referred to as the PCT, remains an iconic trail, passing through California, Oregon, and Washington. Several hundred hikers attempt the entire 2,653-mile trek each year, and many complete the trip without incident. However, in recent years, there have been some high-profile disappearances and deaths. Only about 60% of the 700 to 800 who start the trail actually finish. For the average hiker, it takes around 5 months to complete the thru hike. Although there are some elite athletes who have finished the trail in as little as 2 months. The Pacific Crest Trail, officially designated as the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail, is 263 miles long and is aligned with the highest portion of the Cascade and Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. For the most part, it's located within 100 to 150 miles east of the U.S. Pacific coastline. The trail's southern end is just south of Campo, California by the U.S. border with Mexico, and its northern terminus is on the Canada-U.S. border at the edge of Manning Park in British Columbia. PCT ranges in elevation from just above sea level at the Oregon-Washington border to 13,153 feet at Forster Pass in the Sierra Nevadas. The route passes through 25 national forests and 7 national parks. Its midpoint is near Chester, California, close to Mount Lassen, where the Sierra and Cascade mountain ranges meet. It was designated a National Scenic Trail in 1968, although it was not officially completed until 1993. Pacific Crest Trail was conceived by Clifton Churchill Clark in 1932. It received official status under the National Trail System Act of 1968 and is also part of the 6,875-mile Great Western Loop. Famous sections include the John Muir Trail, Sonora Pass, Sky Lakes Wilderness, Donner Pass, and Badger Flat to Little Willow Lake in the Lassen Volcanic National Park. First, let's talk about disappearances along the Pacific Crest Trail. Since 2016, there have been several high-profile disappearances on the PCT. Were they just misadventure caused by hypothermia or accidents? The cases of Chris Fowler, David O'Sullivan, and Chris Sylvia remind us of the dangers on some parts of the trail, especially in the colder months of the year. First up, David O'Sullivan. David disappeared April 7, 2017. 25-year-old Irishman, David O'Sullivan planned a 5-month hike on the PCT in April of 2017. He left Middleton, County Cork, Ireland on March 20th, but sadly, David never returned to his home country. A novice hiker, he started in Campo on March 22nd and had planned hiking the entire PCT from the border with Mexico to that with Canada. His trail name was Leprechaun. David spent a lot of time preparing for his trip, regularly tackling Cara Untahill, the highest peak in Ireland, at 1,038.6 meters, carrying weights, and he also transformed his parents' garage into a mini gym. Having completed a media course as well as a degree in English and philosophy at the University College Cork, David saved money from his job working in a local garage in Middleton to fund his trip. He was inspired to walk the PCT, having read the book Wild, which also became a film starring Reese Witherspoon. O'Sullivan is described as 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed 154 pounds, has brown hair, blue eyes, wears glasses, and has a heavy Irish accent. He'd been hiking for 2.5 weeks when he found himself in Idlewild, a small mountain town at the foot of the San Jacinto Mountain on April 5th. Idlewild is a popular holiday spot, and he spent the night at the Idlewild Inn, a family-owned accommodation. His mom, Carmel, spoke about the last time he was seen. He arrived into this little town on the 5th called Idlewild. It's about halfway up the mountain, 2.5 weeks into his hike. He did a few chores, got in touch with all his friends on Facebook, and contacted us. Everything was going fine. And he was leaving on the morning of the 7th, and he's not been heard of or seen since. Correspondence with his family indicates that David had plans to hike on the morning of the 7th. He'd been waiting for an adapter for his Kindle to arrive at the post office and was considering waiting until it opened until he set off the next day, but he was concerned that it might interfere with his schedule. It is not known whether he tried to pick up the adapter or not, but it is certain he never received it as it ended up back at the retailer. An email he sent on that very same morning will be the last communication that David ever made. There was unusual weather on the San Jacinto Mountain that year, with an unusual amount of snow for so early in the season. There are numerous trails up the mountain, with Devil's Slide being by far the most popular. But just one day before David was last seen, a hiker reported getting a mile into the trail before encountering snow and turning back. Now, David had no alpine experience, but he had told other hikers he had no intention of hiking the snow, and he did not buy any snow equipment prior to his journey. He did make a $70 purchase at the local outdoor store Nomads, but the item was not registered on their point of sale. According to the store, all their snow equipment would have been listed on their receipt. David was also using a half-mile map, a brand specifically created for the Pacific Coast Trail. The map advised hikers to hike up Black Mountain Road when snow was present in order to avoid the most dangerous part of the terrain. David had been working hard at a garage and saved for a year to go on his Pacific Crest adventure. He visited an ATM before he set off up the mountain, but only withdrew enough to buy more food at the next stop. A sizable amount was left in his account and has not been touched since that final transaction. At home, David's mother Carmel and father Con were becoming increasingly concerned. David had warned them that there would be periods of several weeks where he would not be able to get in touch, but feeling that something was wrong, his parents went ahead and contacted the Pacific Crest Trail Association in April. They were told to sit tight and wait to see if David turned up. He had arranged to meet a friend in Santa Barbara in May, but he never arrived. Carmel and Con called the PCT Association back once again, only to be told that they were not a babysitting service and that there was nothing they could do. As a result, David was not officially reported missing until June 30th, 12 weeks after he had last been seen. A massive search was launched in Whitewater Preserve, an area just north of the San Jacinto Mountains, which would have been en route to David's next scheduled stop. Yet, despite the use of helicopters, dogs, and ATVs, the search and rescue team came up short. With no evidence of foul play, there has been little in the way of official investigation since then. Several hikers have called in eyewitness statements thinking they may have seen David at some point on the trail, but none of these sightings has been positively confirmed, with most vaguely referring to a hiker with an accent. It has since become known that there was a German man who bears a striking resemblance to David on the trail at the same time, and it's possible that some people may have confused the two. In December 2017, an aerial survey was conducted over Idlewild. The pilot, Gus Calderon, and mission specialist Richard McCrae overflew 88 square miles of both mountain face and deep desert, taking over 1,000 photographs of the ground below. Volunteers analyzed those images in great detail, looking for signs of David's blue backpack. Gus and Richard used software supplied by Aero Scientific to conduct the survey. Aero Scientific's flight planning software, known as Flight Planner, and flight management system, known as Avitrix, were used to plan the flight runs over Idlewild and manage the camera system throughout the flight. The aerial survey successfully acquired 1,235 color images of the area at 4-inch resolution. On a regular basis, volunteers, largely from San Diego's Irish community, still scour the mountain on foot and on horses, looking for any signs of David. Drones have been flown over, grid by grid, while people on the ground examine thousands of images for any clues. At the time of this recording, David is still missing. Next, we have the case of Chris Fowler, who disappeared October 12, 2016. 34-year-old Chris Fowler, trail name Sherpa, was completing his NOBO, or northbound, through hike in Washington on the Pacific Crest Trail. On October 12, 2016, he was dropped off near the trailhead at White Pass, Packwood, where he grabbed a coffee before he headed toward the Canadian border to complete the last 366 miles of his hike. Unfortunately, that was the last time he was ever seen alive. His last cell phone ping was in that area near White Pass around 5 p.m. Considerable amounts of snow and freezing rain fell over the next few days. Authorities and volunteers searched much of the trail between White Pass and the Canadian border, yet no sign of Chris was found. While official search and rescue teams under the Yakima Sheriff's Department did an initial search along the PCT from White Pass, in addition to flyovers and road searches, after the initial search, they focused primarily on the area surrounding Blowout Mountain, the location of an unconfirmed sighting by 2 bear hunters on October 22nd. 3 years later, in 2019, Yakima County search and rescue volunteers again conducted multiple searches, led by Sergeant Randy Briscoe. Fowler said another 15 to 20 volunteers formed what she calls her team behind the scenes, a coordinated effort dedicated to combing through the areas they know well. But again, nothing was found. Given the severity of the storm, had Chris had made it to Highway 410 at Chinook Pass, 28 miles from where he started at White Pass, he could have pulled out and sought refuge in town, albeit very cold, wet, and tired, as all hikers were that bailed off-trail during that storm. Since he didn't do so, though, it's believed he went off-trail somewhere between White Pass and Chinook Pass, a 28-mile section. How far off-trail is the question. Some consider any sightings from mid-October or later in any search areas north of Chinook Pass, like Blowout Mountain, to be bogus. Did Chris just succumb to hypothermia on the PCT that October? As of this recording, we have no answers. Next, we have Christopher Stephen Sylvia. He disappeared February 16, 2015, from Warner Springs, California. Chris Sylvia was hiking southbound on the PCT from Anza to Campo. He started his trek near State Route 74 in Anza on February 12, 2015, and planned to hike for at least a week before contacting his friends to pick him up. On February 16th, he called a friend and asked to be picked up the next day at the Buddhist temple on Chihuahua Valley Road. Sylvia's roommate went to the designated spot at the agreed-upon time, but Sylvia never showed up. At first, his roommate just assumed he had decided not to go to the temple after all. Search teams from Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties searched in vain for 4 days, before bad weather forced them to suspend the search and rescue operation. On February 20th, another hiker found Sylvia's gear, including identification, sleeping bag, and backpack, laid out alongside the Pacific Crest Trail near mile marker 127, not far from Mike's place. Despite a large search effort, Sylvia was never heard from again. Chris was described as an experienced outdoorsman, and his mother stated it would be uncharacteristic for him to go hiking alone or to leave his gear behind. When he disappeared, he was known to be wearing a dark-colored fleece jacket, green camouflage print pants, and brown and black hiking boots. He had brown hair, hazel eyes, a mustache, a tattoo of Asian symbols on his side, and a goatee at the time of his disappearance. Now, let's talk about deaths on the Pacific Crest Trail. There are relatively few reported deaths on the PCT through hikes, considering the number of hikers, and the main causes of death are heat exhaustion, falls, and drowning due to either misadventures or just pure bad luck. There have been 19 reported deaths on the Pacific Coast Trail since 1983. However, that number is believed to be much higher. Here are some of their stories. Gerald Duran and Jody Zatchik. Since its formation in 1977, there's been only one known attempt to hike the PCT in winter by the couple Gerald Duran and Jody Zatchik in 1983. They were traveling south to north and were hiking towards Wrightwood, California to resupply when they got lost. They'd started down the wrong canyon and ended up on much steeper terrain than their planned Acorn Trail route. As they were climbing down, they slipped on ice and fell several hundred feet off a cliff to their deaths. Flicka and Jane Rodman. On Sunday, November 19, 1995, Jane and Flicka Rodman, two young, long-distance hikers from Worcester, Mass., were killed near Pear Blossom. The couple had started their Pacific Crest Trail through hike at the Canadian border in July and hiked south, allowing this year's unusually heavy Sierra snows to melt ahead of their arrival. They left the trail, apparently trying to catch up with another southbound couple who were a few days ahead of them. While walking eastward on a path along Highway 138, some distance from the trail itself, they were struck and killed by a driver who lost control of his vehicle after falling asleep at the wheel. John Lauder. Dr. John Lauder, 69, a doctor from San Diego, was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail all the way from East San Diego County to Canada when he was found dead June 5, 1999, near Lone Pine. He was an able and experienced hiker, and had begun his hike on April 23rd at Boulder Oaks, where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses Old Highway 80. He had hoped to complete the through hike by October. With a snowstorm expected, Dr. Lauder had separated from his hiking group as he was struggling to keep up with them. He decided to hike down the mountain, but as the ice storm hit, his vision became impaired. He tripped or slid on ice and fell about 60 feet from a cliff into a canyon. Despite breaking one arm and both legs, Dr. Lauder survived the fall and was able to crawl into his sleeping bag. But his injuries were just too much, and by the time hikers reached him the next day, he had perished. He broke his own rule, never hike alone, said his former wife, Ida Lauder. John Joseph Donovan. John Joseph Donovan, 59, was hiking near Southern California's Mount San Jacinto on May 6, 2005. That day, a blizzard dropped 8 inches of snow on the area, and he was trapped on the mountain. Now, John was a veteran hiker who was a notoriously bad navigator and reckless with it. He had strayed from the Pacific Crest Trail, which he was through hiking, carried no compass and no useful maps, nor a GPS or anything that would help him. All he had instead was a tarp for a tent, socks in place of gloves, and he had a few provisions. He always traveled ultralight, like this as he called it, so if things went wrong, he was in trouble fast. He was an active member of the Old Dominion and Tidewater Appalachian Trail Clubs, and had just retired from 20 years as a licensed clinical social worker with Central State Hospital. Additionally, he served 15 years in the United States Navy. Around 1 p.m. on May 3rd, he climbed into Little Taquitos Valley, just south of Saddle Junction, and found that trail was now concealed by snow. John sought help from 2 other hikers, a Canadian nurse named Connie Davis, age 46, and her 21-year-old son, Alex, both of whom had extensive altitude experience. When Donovan began following the Davis through the snowfield, Connie told him, "We're not going to take the most direct route." He stayed about 30 feet behind them and he put on crampons, but the spikes didn't work well with his lightweight trail runners, and he slipped and fell repeatedly. Eventually, Connie and Alex followed a small creek uphill and turned northwest roughly half a mile south of Saddle Junction. "That's where we saw him last," Connie Davis wrote later in a letter to the PCT community. It was about 8,080 feet on the afternoon of May 3rd. That was the last time Donovan was seen alive. 12 days passed before anyone realized he was missing. Many hikers believe that Donovan headed toward Fuller Ridge and then froze to death in the blizzard on San Jacinto's west side, near Saddle Junction. On Memorial Day weekend, 2005, Riverside County Rescue Unit personnel combed the area with dogs. After 2 days, with no clues, the authorities called off the search for good. Apparently, after leaving the Davises on May 3rd, Donovan had tried to detour west down into Idlewild, but with no way to navigate, he became disoriented. In a journal written in the margins of photocopied guidebook pages, Donovan scribbled, "Couldn't find the trail to Idlewild." So instead, he cut away from Idlewild, drawn by the lights of much larger Palm Springs. Traveling about 3 miles northeast from the Saddle Junction area that night, he crossed Skinny Willow Creek, then climbed a small ridge and plunged down into a steep gash called Hidden Valley. Donovan's journal places him in Long Valley at about 4,300 feet on the night of May 3rd. On May 5th, still camped in the same ravine, he took a fall. How badly he was hurt is unclear, as Donovan didn't write detailed notes. He simply wrote that he had already become too weak to climb up out of the canyon. He tried to signal for help and built a few weak fires that quickly smoldered out, but no one spotted him. A 100-foot waterfall lay directly below, and the canyon's walls were virtually sheer. He was boxed in, and he likely knew it would be days, maybe a week or more, before anyone even noticed he was missing. At one point on May 5, Donovan took an inventory of his supplies. He was down to 12 cheese crackers. In his last entry, dated May 14th, he scribbled that he was going down to Long Creek for water. "Goodbye, and love you all," he wrote. Donovan's remains were eventually discovered by a 20-foot waterfall in a pool amid birches and mossy green rocks in May of 2006. Brandon Day, 28, and Gina Allen, 24, of Dallas, were found in May 2006, after spending 3 nights in the San Jacinto wilderness. The third night, they came across a backpack of supplies at a deserted campsite. Donovan's remains were found near this camp. Day and Alan were visiting the desert east of Los Angeles for a convention when they wandered off a mountain trail during a 2-hour stop with other tourists. Only prepared for a brief hike, they wore light windbreakers and tennis shoes and had no food, spare clothing, or cell phones. At first, they were not too worried because they could hear voices. I still felt we were relatively close, Day said, recalling he thought the trail would be around the next boulder. With night closing in, they took shelter in a small cave between boulders and spent the night sleepless, freezing, and hungry. In the morning, they struggled to follow a stream downhill through boulder-strewn terrain. They decided to keep going with the mantra from night one: "We're going to get out of here. We're not going to die. It's not our time," Day said. The couple found items that Donovan had left behind in a dead-end gorge on Monday, May 8, 2016. This included a warm sweater, foam sleeping mat, poncho, backpack, disposable razor, spoon, dry socks, and matches that the couple used to light a signal fire. Day and Alan were elated, thinking someone there could help them find their way out. But something was wrong. The gear was wet. The radio and flashlight were corroded. They realized the camp was deserted. They found identification showing that the pack belonged to Donovan, who had vanished a year earlier. His last journal entry was 1 year ago to the day that we found it, which was very eerie, Day said. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew to come looking for him. So he was preparing for the end. We were looking at the words of a man who was passing. They were rescued after the flames from the fire were seen from a helicopter. The whole acre or two caught fire, created a really big smoke signal that finally alerted a helicopter crew. Even in his death, he was helping people, Donovan's longtime friend Chris Hook of Richmond, Virginia, said at the time. The couple said they had a real special thanks for Donovan. Next up, Ray Eccles. On May 15, 2006, Wendell Ray Eccles, known as No Way Ray, of Mariposa, California, was approximately 300 miles into a northbound PCT thru hike with his wife Alice Tulloch when he apparently lost his footing and fell about 200 feet to his death. Alice was hiking about 20 yards behind him when he went around a corner and disappeared. The accident occurred in a remote part of the San Bernardino National Forest near Deep Creek. Another group of hikers heard Alice's pleas for help and were able to use a satellite phone to call for assistance. Unfortunately, Ray was pronounced dead at the scene. Before his retirement, Ray worked as a junior high school teacher in a 4-room, 9-grade country school in the Mariposa County Unified School District. He was best known in the hiking community, however, for his frequent posts to the PCTL, his service on the American Long Distance Hiking Association West Board of Directors, his participation in events such as Trail Fest and the annual Day Zero kickoff party, as well as his inspired writing. Adrian Everett Tracy Allison. 20-year-old Adrian Everett Tracy Allison died August 20th, 2013, while free climbing a rock face with friends near the Pacific Crest Trail in Yakima County when he fell to his death. He attended school in Auburn and graduated from Bonnie Lake High School in 2011, where he was an active member of the school band and an avid music enthusiast. Timothy Evan Nodal. On April 24, 2014, near Lake Morena, California, Tim Nodal, 19, began to feel unwell, and he called his stepfather for help, who then called 911. He was hiking with a friend in the Cleveland National Forest in temperatures between 72 and 80 degrees. When firefighters got to the camping area around 1:30 p.m., they were talking with the teenager and going over his symptoms. He said he wasn't feeling good and then suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Tim was pronounced dead at 2:23 p.m. However, oddly enough, there was no evidence of dehydration, alcohol, or substance abuse, according to the coroner's report. Dawson Johnson. Dawson Johnson, a 75-year-old hiker from Redwater, Texas, hiked to the Mount Whitney summit on Tuesday, July 29, 2014, but failed to return to his campsite at Crabtree Meadow. His wife reported him missing, and later his body was spotted on the north side of Mount Whitney, where he apparently had fallen and died. Philip Crosby. On December 11, 2014, 40-year-old Philip Crosby was camping with his son along the Pacific Crest Trail when a tree fell due to high winds in the area. The falling tree, of 8 to 10 inches in diameter, hit their tent and partially struck his father across the arm and chest. His son, Alex Crosby, called 911 and told dispatch his father was complaining of difficulty breathing. A short time later, the elder man succumbed to his injuries. The Crosbys, formerly of Sunny Valley, were homeless at the time and were en route to a destination in Arizona. No other information is available regarding this case. Marvin Novo. On May 29, 2017, in the Mission Creek Preserve area of California, Marvin Novo's body was discovered along the West Fork Trail. He was 58 years old and died while hiking near Whitewater Preserve. He'd been planning his Pacific Crest Trail through hike for at least a decade. It's suspected that his death was heat-related. Rika Morita. Rika Strawberry Morita came to the Pacific Crest Trail from Japan to through hike. She was 32 and lived in Osaka. She was hiking alone and was reported missing. Other Pacific Crest Trail hikers found her July 23, 2017, submerged in the South Fork of the Kings River in Kings Canyon National Park, California. The 2017 hiking season had many dangerous river crossings because of the unusually high snowpack from the previous winter. Xiaokui Tri Wang. Chinese citizen and Pacific Crest Trail thru hiker Xiaokui Tri Wang, 27, was found on July 30, 2017, in Rancheria Creek in Carrot Canyon, downstream from where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses the creek in Yosemite National Park. No information was available as to how or why Wang perished. Emily Lang and Emma Place. On August 12, 2017, 19-year-old Emily Lang and 19-year-old Emma Place both fell off a 150-foot cliff along the PCT near Mount Hood in Oregon. Both bodies landed on rocks at the base of a waterfall about 6 miles northwest of Timberline Lodge. A group of hikers spotted the women that same evening from above a ravine and called 911. They told the dispatcher that both women were not moving and they could see blood on the rocks. "One is still alive. Please hurry," they said. After a few stressful minutes, however, she stopped breathing, and efforts to revive her were not successful. It is unclear which one of the girls was still alive when they were discovered. Next, Finn Bastian. On August 27, 2019, 28-year-old Finn Bastian, a German thru hiker on the PCT, was crossing a wooden bridge along the trail at around 4 p.m. when a tree fell on him. Two young women who were hiking with him, Larissa Stawicki, 27, of Lüneburg, Germany, and Melanie Teek, 38, called 911 and search and rescue teams responded. After pulling Bastian out from under the tree, medics transported him to a trailhead and began performing CPR. They were not able to revive him. The sheriff's department stated that the tree that killed Finn had rotted away at the base. Trevor Lahr. On March 16, 2020, 22-year-old Trevor Lahr started his hike on the Pacific Crest Trail. He hiked to Lake Morena on day 1 and made it to Mount Laguna by day 3. He hiked through snowy mountains and desert heat right from the start. Trevor met 2 other hikers along the way, and they continued the hike together. On March 26th, Trevor and his new friends left a cafe for the long, steep, and dangerous climb into the San Jacinto Mountains. Trevor texted his father saying they hit 6,100 feet and were headed back in the snow. Trevor slept that night at mile 166.5 near where the Forbes Saddle Trail hits the PCT. On March 27, 2020, Trevor was off to Idlewild. It was a wintry morning. The winds were fierce, blowing low clouds over the desert divide. It was still snowing when he got to the Spittler Peak Trail at just after 9 a.m. After more climbing, Trevor and his new friends arrived at Apache Peak. With no snow safety equipment, Trevor and his friends proceeded slowly across the slope of Apache Peak. Hiking single file and 50 feet apart, Trevor and his 2 partners were confident yet cautious. In an instant, however, Trevor was gone. Trevor slipped on snow-covered ice and fell down a 600-foot chute. He died doing what he loved, living his dream on the PCT, far above Palm Springs. In seconds, he lay motionless on the mountain. Trevor sadly succumbed to his injuries before search and rescue could get to him. Lastly, we have Gavin Johnson. Gavin Johnson, 28, who was missing for 8 months, was found in June 2019 after heading out on the Pacific Crest Trail. Gavin Johnson's family said he had virtually no hiking experience and was likely having a mental health crisis before he disappeared. His remains were eventually found south of Stevens Pass in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness area, which is in the Central Cascades of Washington state. Gavin had called his father, Marvin, saying he wanted to go into the forest to pray and become closer with God. The weekend before he went missing, Johnson told his parents he had been talking with Jesus, and he wanted to quit his new job and be homeless, according to his stepmother, Deborah Johnson. A forest official later confirmed that he spoke with Johnson sometime in October of 2018 in Skykomish. That was the last confirmed sighting. Gavin was a devout Catholic who attended daily Mass several times a week at Our Lady Perpetual Help Church in Everett. When he wasn't at church, he could often be seen at the Safeway on Broadway, where he spent much of his working life. He also had a job at an aerospace parts manufacturer, and in his spare time, he liked to play video games, classical guitar, and spend time with his parents. According to the family, a hiker spotted Johnson's body near the trail by Glacier Lake in a sleeping bag with a rosary in his hand. He was found with a phone, wallet, and gear that he reportedly bought just before leaving. Reportedly, before leaving for the hike, Gavin had sold all his belongings and bought over $1,100 in gear from Cabela's Outdoor Supply. Before heading out, he stopped by the Everett Gospel Missions Men's Shelter to donate some money. Gavin's car was parked on the north side of Stevens Pass, but he said he was going south on the trail. Then a hiker reported possibly seeing Gavin about 75 miles south near the Snoqualmie Pass. Family members spent weeks searching, and search and rescue volunteers also scoured the rugged terrain. The first few days of the search were summer-like, and after that, the temperatures dropped into the 30s and 40s. It began raining and then changed to snow. The ground became very soggy. Marvin said that they bought equipment such as snowshoes to keep up with the weather, but eventually he recalled thinking, "We're not going to find him." Gavin Johnson made it less than 15 miles south from Stevens Pass before coming to a stop. He set up camp away from the trail toward Glacier Lake, such that other hikers might miss him as they walked by, Marvin Johnson, his father, said. Tied to his tent was a note, written on the paper wrapping from a flare. On it, Gavin Johnson explained he had run out of food and would likely die soon. He wrote about what he wanted his funeral arrangements to look like, said Gavin's uncle, Carl Johnson. Also on the note was a date. Gavin's father believes his son was in the wilderness for about 25 days before he passed away. Sad indeed. If you or someone you know needs mental health assistance, please reach out. There are agencies and people out there who can help that truly care. Hello, friends, and welcome to Strange Stories of the Alaskan Triangle. I think you would all agree with me that there are certain areas of the planet that seem to be magnets for missing persons and mysterious disappearances. Vast, untouched wildernesses of sprawling forest, icy mountain peaks, and desolate tundra in Alaska, known as the Alaskan Triangle, has been at the center of over 16,000 disappearances since 1988. What is going on in this remote, unexplored wilderness that causes so many people to disappear without a trace? Is there a scientific explanation for why so many people go missing? Or is something more sinister happening? Now, a little bit about Alaska. Alaska is a vast desert almost of isolation and beauty, known for its towering mountains, rich oil fields, and extreme fishing in the Bering Sea. Among the vast untouched wilderness of sprawling forest, icy mountain peaks, and desolate tundra are the unexplained stories of over 16,000 disappearances. In any given year, anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people go missing in Alaska, never to be seen again. Authorities conduct hundreds of rescue missions, but most often return without finding the missing person or any evidence at all. Accidental injuries are the third highest cause of death in Alaska, twice the national incidence rate. That statistic comes from the Alaska Division of Public Health. In addition to car accidents, this category of fatalities can also include people falling down mountains or slipping into the spaces between glaciers, also known as crevices. Of those accidental deaths, drowning is the third highest cause. Many times, the cold temperatures cause bodies to sink to the bottom of the water rather than float to the top, adding yet another challenge to finding missing people. Now, what exactly is the Alaskan Triangle? The Alaskan Triangle, first named in 1972, connects the state's largest city of Anchorage in the south to Juneau in the southeast panhandle to Barrow, a small town on the state's north coast. Roughly 1 in every 250 people that have vanished in Alaska did so in the Alaskan Triangle, and since 1988, there have been over 16,000 disappearances in this so-called triangle. Statistically, Alaska has more annual missing persons reports than anywhere else in the country, twice the national average. It also has the highest number of missing people who are never found. In 2007, for example, 2,833 people were reported missing, and when compared to the state's comparatively low population of around 670,000 at the time, that equates to about 4 in every 1,000 people, a staggering amount. Along with missing persons reports, state troopers oversee search and rescue operations. In 2007, they performed 42 missions related to overdue hikers, 85 related to overdue boaters, and 100 related to overdue snow machine operators who were temporarily missing. Those facts come from the Alaska Governor's Office. The Civil Air Service also assists with search and rescue missions, and Alaska's branch received the most state funding and saved the most lives in 2006 out of all other state branches. Now, let's delve into some of the more infamous disappearances from the Alaskan Triangle. First, the disappearance of House Majority Leader Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich. In 1972, two prominent politicians, House Majority Leader Hale Boggs and Representative Nick Begich, along with aide Russell Brown and Bush pilot Don Jones, mysteriously vanished in the region while on their way back from Anchorage to Juneau while flying in their Cessna 310 aircraft. An intense search lasted for 39 days, including 400 aircraft, an SR-71 Blackbird, dozens of boats, including 12 from the Coast Guard. The search area covered over 32,000 square miles, an area about the size of the state of South Carolina. No evidence of the plane was ever found, and the men were eventually declared dead. At the time, there were theories claiming the disappearance was orchestrated or covered up by then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in response to intense political struggles he had with Boggs. To this day, no trace of the plane or the men has ever been found. Next, 1986 UFO incident. In 1986, a Japanese plane was flying from Iceland to Anchorage when it came across 3 UFOs. The 3 unidentified flying objects followed the airliner for approximately 400 miles through the Alaska Triangle. The 3 unidentified flying objects followed the airliner for approximately 400 miles through the Alaskan Triangle. One of the objects was said to be twice the size of an aircraft carrier. The crew reported seeing flashing lights following their plane, and air traffic controllers also witnessed something unidentifiable on their radar that was reported as close as 5 miles to the plane. The pilot claimed that at one point, the 2 smaller ships appeared directly in front of the plane at pretty close range. He described the 2 smaller ships and the mothership disappearing and reappearing quickly, moving fast and stopping suddenly, which, of course, is impossible for a normal airliner to do. In order to escape the UFOs, the pilot received special permission from the ground crew to fly at a lower altitude while making several elusive turns to evade the objects, but nothing he did could evade them. After about 32 minutes, the UFOs disappeared, although the pilot claimed he thought the entire encounter lasted much longer than that. It's not uncommon in UFO encounters for a time to seem to stop, speed up, or stand still. Next, missing Douglas C-54 Skymaster, serial number 42-72469.
In the 1950s, there was a military plane carrying an 8-man crew and 36 passengers. The plane lost contact with the ground and was never heard from again. There were 2 separate reports of UFO activity in the area at the time of the disappearance. One was a week before, and the other was 2 days after. The Army ended up conducting the largest military search and rescue mission at that time and found nothing. To this day, it's known as one of the largest groups of military personnel to ever go missing. Now let's talk a little bit about missing hikers and mountain climbers. First up, Richard Lyman Griffiths. Richard Lyman Griffiths from Spokane, Washington, invented a wilderness survival cocoon, and in the summer of 2006, he headed into the wilderness of southeast Alaska to test his invention. Oddly, no one reported him missing for a year. When authorities began searching for him, they learned a bus dropped off Griffiths along the Alaska Highway. He stopped at a lodge near the White River, where he left some of his gear and told people he planned to hike upriver to McCarthy, a small town in the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park. He was never seen again. Since Griffiths told friends he might spend the winter in Alaska, no one worried about him for several months. But finally, a friend called the Canadian Mounties and reported him missing. His friend had no idea where Griffiths was planning to go to test his wilderness cocoon. No trace of him or his bright orange cocoon has ever been found. Now, mountain climbing, as we all know, is a dangerous pursuit. In addition to Mount Denali, the highest peak in North America, Alaska boasts many of the most challenging mountains and glaciers any daring alpinist could hope to conquer. Mountain climbers die every year in Alaska, but most climbers ascend in groups. If 1 or 2 members of the group tragically fall into a crevice, their companions can tell the story about what happened to them. When a solo climber makes a fatal mistake, no one is there to record the details, and experts can only guess at what happened. One such climber, Naomi Uemura, a famous Japanese adventurer and mountain climber, decided to attempt a solo winter ascent of Denali in 1984. Uemura had already successfully summited Denali on his own, but he wanted to try a more challenging climb in the winter. He made it to the top on February 13, 1984, but something happened on his descent and he never returned to base camp. Conditions near the top of Denali when Uemura disappeared included high winds and a temperature of 50 below. Such brutal conditions leave little room for human error. More recently, on March 7, 2018, Ryan Johnson and Marc-Andre Leclerc, 2 experienced climbers, failed to return from a climb on a 7-peaked mountain near Juneau. In this instance, though, searchers found a clue hinting at the fate of the 2 men. They found an intact anchor rope at the top of an ice chute on one peak, and then saw 2 climbing ropes in a crevice midway down the same peak. A spokesman for the Alaska State Troopers said the evidence showed the climbers made it to the top and set an anchor. Then, she said, they were either taken out by an avalanche, a rope failed, or something else catastrophic happened. Paul Michael Lemaitre. 65-year-old Michael Lemaitre was competing for the first time in the 85th running of the Mountain Marathon race, with participants running up the mountain surrounded by thick forests and creeks over 3.1 to 3.5 miles. Starting in downtown Seward, racers run a half mile to the bottom of Mount Marathon, then scramble about 2,900 vertical feet straight up cliffs and mud and shale before getting to Race Point, an artificial summit. Then participants go downhill over snowfields and rock fields, waterfalls and crags until they reach the finish line back on the streets of Seward. Tom Walsh, a race steward, saw Michael ascending to the turnaround point with about 200 feet to go. At this point, the area was getting foggy and cold, but Walsh saw no reason to be concerned about the condition of the runner. Walsh asked Lemaitre for his bib number, and he replied 548. And as he descended back towards the town, he texted race officials bib number 548 would be home in about an hour and a half. Unfortunately, that was the last time Michael was ever seen. Mountain rescue experts, firemen, state troopers, search dogs, and Michael's family spent thousands of combined hours searching the area without a single clue ever being found. And even after the official search was called off, volunteers continued to search the mountain, but to no avail. Now, what are some of the reasons that people think the Alaskan Triangle exists? One of the most common is the severe weather and harsh landscape. Alaska has vast swaths of remote wilderness. Over half of the entire nation's federally designated wilderness, recognized by the Wilderness Act passed in 1964,
around 57 million acres of it are in Alaska, with even more that is not specifically designated as protected land, and much of this land is nearly completely untouched by humans. This harsh landscape is full of all manner of perils, including unforgiving weather, hazardous terrain, dangerous wild animals, and harrowing geological dangers, with Alaska being the home of around 100 active volcanoes. Considering this massive amount of rugged wilderness, which riddled with countless potential hazards, and the fact that many tourists come here to camp and hike are unprepared, it's perhaps no surprise that a good amount of people may become lost in the middle of nowhere, encounter some danger that incapacitates them and prevents them from getting back to civilization, or just simply killed by wild animals or the elements. Due to its reputation, parts of Alaska can get pretty toasty during the summer. Much of the state recently endured a stretch of temperatures you'd more commonly see in Minnesota than in Alaska. Fairbanks, a city that's geographically planted just right of center in the state's otherwise unpopulated wilderness, recorded 2 high temperatures of 88 degrees Fahrenheit earlier this month. The city has recorded highs of 80 degrees or warmer 10 times since June 1st. Average highs in Fairbanks range from the upper 60s in June to the mid-70s in July, normally. This month also saw the all-time record warmest temperature ever recorded so close to the Arctic Ocean, with a small town in far northern Alaska reached a daytime high of 84 Fahrenheit. Since warm, unstable air is the fuel that feeds a thunderstorm, talking about the warmth in Alaska helps us understand how common severe thunderstorms can be there. The state is no stranger to thunderstorms. During the heat wave earlier in the month, lightning monitors detected tens of thousands of lightning strikes across the state during the 2-week period. Cold weather, of course, happens too. Fairbanks dropped to 50 below zero for the first time in 5 years recently, with Anchorage climatologist Brian Brettschneider saying, triggering spooky ice fog across the city. Ice fog occurs when tiny ice particles are suspended in the air when temperatures fall lower than about 22 below zero. Now, is it possible that there are aliens in Alaska and within this triangle? According to the National UFO Reporting Center, since 1998, there have been over 560 reported UFO sightings in Alaska, with the majority of the sightings being in, you guessed it, the Alaskan Triangle. There are claims of a large alien base in Alaska. In his 1997 book, Remote Viewers, Jim Schnabel told the story of the U.S. intelligence community's involvement in the controversial issue of psychic spying that largely began in the early to mid-70s. Commenting on the skills of a talented remote viewer in relation to matters of UFO nature, one Pat Price, Schnabel noted Price was of the opinion that Alaska's Mount Hayes, the jewel of a glacial range northeast of Anchorage, housed one of the aliens' largest bases. According to Pat Price, the aliens that live deep inside Mount Hayes are very good-looking, differing only in their heart, lungs, blood, and eyes. Ominously, he added that the aliens use thought transfer for motor control of us. Price added, the site has also been responsible for strange activity and malfunction of U.S. and Soviet space objects. Rather notably, despite the controversial nature of this story, we find that the U.S. military took a great deal of interest in tales of UFO activity in Alaska in the formative years of the subject. For example, formerly classified FBI files tell of startling encounters with UFOs in Alaska in the period from 1947 to 1950. It was in August of 47 that a highly impressive account of UFO incident involving 2 serving members of the military was supplied to the FBI at Anchorage. The report began, this is to advise that 2 Army officers reported to the Office of the Director of Intelligence Headquarters Alaskan Department at Fort Richardson, Alaska, that they had witnessed an object passing through the air at a tremendous rate of speed, which could not be judged as 2 miles per hour. According to the official report, the UFO was initially sighted by only one of the 2 officers, but he soon alerted his colleague to the strange sight. The object appeared to be shaped like a sphere and did not give the impression of being saucer-like or comparable to a disc. The first officer stated that it would be impossible to give minute details concerning the object, but that it appeared to be approximately 2 or 3 feet in diameter and did not leave any vapor trail in the sky. Being the experienced officer that he was, in his first attempt to gauge the altitude of the object and from a comparison with cloud formations in the area, he determined that whatever the nature of the mystery sphere, it was cruising at a height of more than 10,000 feet. And it should be noted that to be at such a height and still be visible, in all probability, the UFO must have exceeded by a wide margin his initial size estimate of 2 or 3 feet. When questioned, the second officer gave a substantially similar account, the only marked difference being that, in his opinion, he considered the object to have been approximately 10 feet in diameter and compared it to half the size of a full moon on an ordinary night. This discrepancy in size was apparently due to the fact that the second officer believed the UFO was more likely to have been at a height of 3,000 to 4,000 feet, rather than at an altitude of 10,000 feet, as had been suggested by his colleague. The difference of opinion over the altitude and size of the object may or may not have been of significance. The important factor, however, was that both officers agreed that some type of anomalous object had most definitely been spotted. And, as the report concluded, the second officer pointed out that one of the remarkable features of this report was that it was definitely traveling against the wind. Shortly afterwards, the FBI office at Anchorage reported to Bureau Director J. Edgar Hoover that we have been able to locate a flyer who observed some flying object near Bethel, Alaska in July 1947. The report to Hoover continued, the pilot related that the occasion of seeing the flying object near Bethel was on a July day when the sky was completely clear of clouds, and it being during the early part, it is daylight the entire night. The time of his sighting of this flying object was about 10 p.m., and the sun had just dropped beyond the horizon. Flying weather was extremely good, and he was coming into Bethel Airport with a DC-3. On approaching the airport, the pilot was amazed to see to his left an unidentified craft the size of a C-54 without any fuselage, he says, which seemed to resemble a flying wing. As a result of its unique shape, the pilot was initially unable to determine whether the object was heading towards his aircraft or away from it, and elected to make a 45-degree turn in an attempt to defuse any possible chance of collision. The FBI noted that the pilot was certain that the craft was free of any external power source, such as a propeller-driven engine, and exhibited no exhaust as it flew by. The document adds, he called on his radio to the Civil Aeronautics Administration station at Bethel, asking what aircraft was in the vicinity, and they had no reports of any. The object he sighted was some 5 or 10 miles from the airport before his arrival, and he stated that the path did not go directly across the airport. He, of course, could not tell where the object was making any noise, and stated that it was flying at a 1,000-foot altitude and estimated travel in excess of 300 miles per hour. It was traveling in the direction from Bethel to Nome, which is a northwesterly direction. He noted no radio interference and is unable to describe the color other than it appeared dark but of definite shape and did not blend into the sky but had a definite, concise outline. He clearly observed the object at this time. As the 1940s drew to a close and a new decade dawned, the FBI continued to receive and log high-quality UFO reports on a regular basis. Of those, one of the more credible related to a noteworthy series of encounters that occurred in Alaskan airspace over the course of 2 days in early 1950. Forwarded to the FBI by an official U.S. Navy source, the confidential 3-page intelligence report paints a startling picture of multiple UFO encounters involving the military. Titled Unidentified Phenomena in Vicinity of Kodiak, Alaska. It concerns a report of sightings of unidentified airborne objects by various naval personnel on 22 and 23 January 1950. The author of the report noted, at 22-0240W, January, Lieutenant Smith, USN, patrol plane commander of P2V3 No. 4 of Patrol Squadron 1, reported an unidentified radar contact 20 miles north of the Naval Air Station, Kodiak, Alaska. When this contact was first made, Lieutenant Smith was flying the Kodiak Security Patrol. At 0243W, 8 minutes later, a radar contact was made on an object 10 miles southeast of NAS Kodiak. Lieutenant Smith checked in with the control tower to determine known traffic in the area and was informed that there was none. During this period, the radar operator, Gasky, ALC, USN, reported intermittent radar interference of a type never before experienced. Contact was lost at this time, but intermittent interference continued. Now, Smith and Gasky were not the only two to report that unidentified vehicles had intruded into Alaskan airspace. At the time of these encounters, the USS Tilbrook was anchored in the vicinity of Buoy 19 in the nearby Manship Canal. On board the Tilbrook was a seaman named Morgan, first name unknown, who was standing watch. At some point between 0200 and 0300 hours, Morgan reported that a very fast-moving red light, which appeared to be of exhaust nature, seemed to come from the southeast, moved clockwise in a large circle in the direction of and around Kodiak, and returned out in a generally southeast direction. Perhaps not believing what he was seeing, Morgan alerted one of his shipmates, Carver, to the strange spectacle, and both watched as the UFO made a return flight. According to the testimony of both Morgan and Carver, the object was in sight for an estimated 30 seconds. No odor or sound was detected, and the object was described to have the appearance of a ball of fire about 1 foot in diameter. The report then records yet another encounter with the mystery visitor. At 2:20-440W, conducting routine Kodiak security patrol, Lieutenant Smith reported a visual sighting of an unidentified airborne object at a range of 5 miles on the starboard bow. This object showed indications of great speed on the radar scope. The trailing edge of the blip gave a tail-like indication. Lieutenant Smith quickly advised the rest of the crew of the PV-23 number 24 that the UFO was in sight, and all watched fascinated as the strange vehicle soared overhead at a speed estimated to have been around 1,800 miles per hour. Smith climbed to intercept the UFO and vainly tried to circle it. Needless to say, its high speed and remarkable maneuverability ensured that Smith's actions were futile. However, neither Lieutenant Smith nor his crew was quite prepared for what happened next. Subsequently, the object seemed to be opening the range, the official report reads, and Smith attempted to close the range. The UFO was observed to open out somewhat, then to turn to the left and come up on Smith's quarter. Smith considered this to be a highly threatening gesture and turned out all lights in the aircraft. 4 minutes later, the object disappeared from view in a southeasterly direction. At around 0400 hours on the following day, Lieutenants Barco and Causer of Patrol Squadron 1 were conducting the Kodiak security patrol when they, too, sighted an unidentified aerial vehicle. At the time of their encounter, the aircraft in which the officers were flying was approximately 62 miles south of Kodiak. For 10 minutes, Barco and Causer, along with the pilot, Captain Paulson, watched stunned as the mysterious object twisted and turned in the Alaskan sky. An assessment of these reports read thus. Number 1, to Lieutenant Smith and crew, it appeared as 2 orange lights rotating around a common center, like 2 jet aircraft making slow rolls in tight formation. It had a wide speed range. 2, to Morgan and Carver, it appeared as a reddish-orange ball of fire about 1 foot in diameter, traveling at a high rate of speed. 3, to Causer, Barco, and Paulson, it appeared to be a pulsating orange-yellow projectile-shaped flame with regular periods of pulsation on 3 to 5 seconds. Later, as the object increased the range, the pulsations appeared to increase to on 7 or 8 seconds and off 7 or 8 seconds. The final comment on the encounter reads, in view of the fact that no weather balloons were known to have been released within a reasonable time before the sightings, it appears that the object or objects were not balloons. If not balloons, the objects must be regarded as phenomena, possibly meteorites, the exact nature of which could not be determined by this office. The meteorite theory for this series of encounters is particularly puzzling. It goes without saying that meteorites do not stay in sight for an estimated 30 seconds. Meteorites do not close in on military aircraft in what is deemed to be a highly threatening gesture, and they do not appear as 2 orange lights rotating about a common center. In other words, it seems safe to conclude that genuinely anomalous phenomena were indeed witnessed by experienced military personnel at Kodiak, Alaska in January of 1950. Now, does any of this prove that there really is an alien base deep within Alaska's Mount Hayes, as Pat Price suggests? No, of course not. But, in view of all the above, perhaps it's time to take a closer look at Price's claims, just in case. Now, in regards to Bigfoot, with the huge amounts of forests and uncharted wilderness, Alaska is certainly a perfect location for Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, to hide out. There are numerous reports of Bigfoot sightings throughout the entire state. Some reports include evidence of nesting sites, a possible Bigfoot skeleton, and unidentified hair samples. Some witnesses have even reported seeing a swimming Sasquatch during their encounters. Some villages have even relocated as a result of terrifying encounters with Bigfoot, which is surprising because the common understanding is that the creature prefers isolated areas and is in general quite peaceful. Peterson. There were stories told from 1900 to 1925 about a trapper that went into the woods near Peterson and disappeared, shortly after reporting exceptionally large tracks in the snow. The Strangest Story Ever Told by Virginia Culp documents this incredibly eerie encounter in further detail. In the town of Ruby, in 1943, it was reported that a man was attacked by an unknown creature in the wilderness about 18 miles down the Yukon from the town of Ruby. He later died of internal injuries, and the creature that attacked him, presumably a Bigfoot, was said to be run off by his dog team. Bristol Bay. In 1940, near the town of Kaluka, a group of ladies was berry picking when they reportedly came upon a large, man-like creature with long hair running down its back. They later went on to capture this creature, cage it, and feed it. It later died, and the story was documented in a letter from the alleged cage keeper. Ketchikan. This southwest town holds some pretty wild tales of the past. In 1956, about 50 miles southwest of Ketchikan, a man that was out fishing reported seeing an 8-foot-tall creature that was around 400 pounds and walked on 2 feet like an ape. There was also a young boy that reported a similar sighting nearby in 1960 and reacted to the encounter by screaming and running off as fast as possible. Port Chatham, also known as Portlock, this eerie small village on the Kenai Peninsula was home to so many Bigfoot sightings that the entire population eventually fled due to an overwhelming amount of fear. For a period of time during the 1900s, torn-up bodies were washing up on the shores of this small village, making the people believe that it had to be the evil Sasquatch spirits that roamed the woods nearby. Wrangell. Multiple Bigfoot sightings occurred in this area during the early 1900s. One includes a man that was berry picking in the woods and was awakened by the sounds of a massive man-like creature having a conversation nearby. Another story in the area is about a tall Bigfoot creature that actually ended up carrying a 3-year-old back to her home after she wandered off into the woods without anyone noticing her. Now, if Bigfoot is as confrontational as people in Alaska claim it to be, it's a possibility that this creature is perhaps the reason why some people go missing there, especially in the wilderness, if they have come face to face with it. Now, what about the energy vortices that are supposedly found in Alaska? The Alaskan Triangle comprises one of these so-called vile vortices, or geographical areas around the planet, postulated by American researcher and cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson. Vile vortices are claimed to exhibit extreme electric, magnetic, and electromagnetic anomalies, as well as energy vortex called ley lines, which are theorized subterranean electromagnetic currents. The most famous vile vortices is the notorious Bermuda Triangle, but they are also said to exist in places as far-flung as the Algerian megaliths to the south of Timbuktu, the Indus Valley in Pakistan, Hamakulia volcano in Hawaii, the Devil's Sea near Japan, the South Atlantic, and both the North and South Poles. Various famous places such as Stonehenge, Easter Island, and the pyramids of Egypt are all said to lie on vortexes, and indeed it is claimed by some to be the reason these monuments were erected in the first place. These energy vortexes are said to create all sorts of strange phenomena. They are thought to affect humans in various physical, mental, and emotional ways, such as causing visions, demonstrating miraculous powers of healing, and generating spurts of creativity or profound epiphanies. Many people believe that they can tap into their higher selves while at these vortexes. These places can also allegedly induce disorientation, confusion, and both visual and auditory hallucinations, as well as cause delicate electrical instrumentation to go haywire or to completely malfunction. More far-out theories on energy vortexes are that they are actually doorways into spiritual dimensions, or maybe even gateways to other realms. All of these things could explain why people in vehicles such as ships or airplanes go missing in these regions at an astonishing rate. There are some interesting things that seem to support the idea that the Alaskan Triangle could be one of these vortexes. Alaska is covered with a large concentration of magnetic anomalies, some of which can disrupt compasses to the point that they are off as much as 30 degrees. In addition, some search and rescue workers in the area have reported having auditory hallucinations there, most commonly described as sounding like an angry swarm of bees and feeling unusually disoriented or lightheaded. Some readings of areas in the supposed Alaskan Triangle have indeed produced various unusual anomalies and spikes of electromagnetic activity. Could this have anything to do with the disappearances? Unfortunately, it's unclear whether such vile vortices even truly exist, and the theory has been open to a good amount of skepticism, so it is hard to say for sure. Something else in Alaska that may be responsible for taking people is what's known as the Tlingit shape-shifting demon. Now, there are many theories regarding all these disappearances in the Alaskan Triangle, and one of them include the evil spirits associated with the native Tlingit people who live in this area. These people are said to have origins dating back to 11,000 years ago. Their name, Tlingit, means people of the tides. These people believe that there is a shape-shifting demon named Kushtaka who is a cross between a man and an otter. It is said to lure people to their impending doom by attracting lost people to the water by portraying children or women who are screaming for help. It is also said that when the Kushtaka, also known as the Otter Man, captures these lost people, it then steals their souls. It is folklore that has never been proven, of course, but it's still a frightening thought, to say the least. Something else to consider in Alaska? Animal attacks. Although moose aren't more dangerous than bears necessarily in terms of behavior, they pose a greater threat of injuring you simply because of their population size. Moose outnumber bears nearly 3 to 1 in Alaska, wounding around 5 to 10 people in the state annually. That's more than the grizzly bear and black bear attacks combined. From 1997 to 2017, there were a total of 24 fatal bear attacks in North America. 4 of these were in Alaska. The average age of those attacked? 41. The youngest was 5 months old, and the oldest was a 93-year-old female. Overall, there were only 10 fatal bear attacks in Alaska if you count black, brown, polar, and grizzly bears. What about human predators? That brings us to the Nome serial killer. Around 2005, people began to notice that a large percentage of residents or tourists who went missing in Alaska happened to disappear from the city of Nome. In fact, the numbers became so worrying that rumors of a serial killer began to run rampant throughout local topics of conversation, totally ruining the vibe. This loud panic eventually caught the ear of the FBI, who came rushing in to investigate, eager to catch a murderer and show him off to their friends. But they didn't find one. Instead, they concluded that it was Nome's fault all along. You see, Alaska is known to have one of the highest ratio of alcohol-free municipalities in America. But Nome loves to party, which is the very reason why so many people flock to the city in the first place. So now you have a bunch of drunk visitors wandering off alone, into the woods to take a pee maybe, and then suddenly they get eaten by a bear, or stolen by aliens, or seduced by the Otter Man, or they simply pass out and freeze to death. So at this time, there has been no evidence supporting that there is a serial killer on the loose in Nome, Alaska. And then there's the popular Black Pyramid legend. While nobody really knows what this means or if it even exists at all, there's this obscure legend that a black pyramid twice the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza is buried beneath Alaska, around the Mount McKinley area. What's more, this tale came out as recently as 1992, which of course means it's got to be true. Just kidding. That year, on Anchorage's Channel 13, 3 scientists announced that they had accidentally discovered an unexplainable structure below the ground, which they located using seismic recording equipment. According to Douglas A. Muchler, geologists had used the detonation to undertake a seismographic study of the Earth's crust, only to find a pyramid structure larger than Cheops underground, somewhere west of Mount McKinley. Muchler recalls that the local NBC affiliates ran a story announcing the structure's discovery about 6 months after the detonation, but when he attempted to follow up with the station to get a copy of the story, evidently not part of his duties at Fort Richardson, they denied that the story had ever run and asserted that they certainly didn't have a copy to provide. Muchler then called relatives to track down copies of the story that had run on other stations, but apparently none had. The discovery only appeared on Anchorage's Channel 13. Muchler even wrote a letter to noted investigator of paranormal things Linda Moulton Howe, asking her about the pyramid under Alaska. The letter was as follows. My name is Douglas A. Muchler, CW2, USA, retired, and during my service tour in Alaska, I was informed of a pyramid under this land. There's other information concerning this that came to my attention after it was reported to us in 1992. I've tried to pass this info to others, but have not heard any response to my information. I assure you that I'm telling you the truth about this, and I think this is being kept quiet by our government, as the news was buried the very next day after it was brought to my attention. If you can help me get this info out to you, please call me so I can talk to you about this. He gives his phone number. The whole story is pretty interesting, and this can be verified with your contacts. I'm assured of that, as I do not have them and came up with 0 from the news people there. I'll tell you the whole story if you're interested. I've only contacted a couple people, but have not heard back from any of them. I'm wondering if my emails are getting through at all, or if this is an old story that has no interest to reporters. Thank you for your time in this matter. Douglas A. Muchler. Now, since this finding, more and more retired anonymous military men have come forward, conveniently refusing to speak to anyone but famed investigator Linda Moulton Howe, telling her the secret story of some guarded black pyramid. In July of 2012, Linda Moulton Howe herself added to the mystery on late-night radio talk show Coast to Coast AM. That evening, Moulton Howe broadcast a pre-recorded interview with Doug Muchler, a retired U.S. Army counterintelligence warrant officer, she says, who provided many of the initial facts about the pyramid and first alleged the site's current connection with the U.S. military. From what we've heard, it's reported to be an architectural construction built by an ancient civilization, but with the power to generate enough electricity to supply not only all of Alaska, but most probably much of Canada as well. Some have even further speculated that this pyramid was built by Linda Moulton Howe herself in her mind to generate book sales. Hello, friends. In this episode, we're doing something just a little bit different. While our main focus will always be missing persons cases, this video will delve into the mysteries side of the channel name. Now, while researching and writing this episode, I was a little bit hesitant at first to recount some of the bizarre stories being found. However, after giving it some careful consideration in the broader scope of things, I realized that in a world where people can literally turn a corner on a mountain trail and seemingly disappear from the face of the earth while leaving absolutely no trace in the process, and we have covered disappearances from Mount Shasta in previous videos, well, then maybe some of these stories and legends aren't as far-fetched as first perceived. With that said, let's begin, shall we? Mount Shasta. Very few places in the United States are as completely steeped in mystery and the supernatural as Mount Shasta. Located in Northern California, only about an hour from the Oregon border, this semi-dormant volcano and the surrounding area are, according to legend, home to spirits, gods, Bigfoot, aliens, fairies, robots, ascended masters, Lemurians, occultists, underground bases, secret tunnels, and other strange entities and features. Rising to a height of 14,162 feet, Mount Shasta is an imposing figure set against a backdrop of stunning wilderness. Rugged outcrops, scenic vistas, mountain streams, waterfalls, lakes, glaciers, and caverns of various size. It truly is one of the most impressive mountains in the United States. And even though the last volcanic activity was way back in 1786, it's still currently considered active by the USGS. But aside from the beauty and natural grandeur, Mount Shasta has an ominous aura about it. The mountain does hold some dark secrets. Many consider it a place of portals to strange realms of the unexplained. The indigenous people of the area revered Mount Shasta as a magical and supernatural place many, many decades before the white man arrived in Northern California. One popular Shasta legend claims that before there were humans on the planet, the chief of the great sky spirits grew tired of his icy home in the above world. He used a stone to make a hole in the sky and shoved ice and snow into the hole. The resulting mound was what came to be known as Mount Shasta. Next, the chief of the sky climbed down onto Mount Shasta, and seeing it was barren, he chose to place trees there. When he walked through the snow, it melted and formed streams and rivers. As the leaves began to fall from the trees, the sky chief used his breath to turn them into birds. The chief of the great sky spirits was so pleased with Mount Shasta that he chose to make it home for his family. Not missing the cold from the above world, the sky chief made a hole in the middle of the mountain and placed a fire inside it to keep his family warm. When he placed logs into the fire, the mountain would shake and emit sparks and spew fire. Although it's unknown as to exactly how Mount Shasta was named, one popular explanation states that the name comes from the Russian language. Supposedly, settlers from Russia who lived in coastal California
were able to see the summit of Mount Shasta off in the distance. They referred to it as Shasta, which means white or pure in their language. This eventually came to be pronounced and shortened to just Mount Shasta. Others claim that one of the local tribes of the indigenous peoples in the area, known as the Shasta, loved and hunted on the mountain, and it came to be named after them. Regardless of how it got to be named, nowadays Mount Shasta is a well-known and popular destination for snow skiers, hikers, hunters, anglers, spelunkers, and many others who love rugged outdoor activities. Mount Shasta is also a popular destination for New Agers and other seekers wishing to bask in the vibe of the mountain. Currently, Shasta is home to a huge amount of day spas, retreats, a Buddhist monastery, as well as a plethora of New Age consultants, Zen instructors, and those claiming to be ambassadors to space aliens and ascended masters. In fact, there's so much strangeness on the mountain, one is almost assured to have some sort of weird experience when visiting Shasta. Paranormal investigators state that the most unusual encounters usually happen when you least expect it and are far away from other people. Shaman, New Age seekers, and those trying to contact the mothership may inadvertently disturb the energies on the mountain and cause truly paranormal events to become hidden away, according to some. Nevertheless, there's been more than enough bizarre happenings in the area to suggest that there are strange powers at work here. In the lore of the Native Americans familiar with Shasta, the terms for ghost, soul, and life are very similar. According to these tribes, ghosts, which are often spotted near burial areas as flickering orbs of light, are to be feared, as merely observing them is said to be an omen foretelling bad luck or perhaps even death. Also, according to their legends, after death, the soul is said to travel west, rise into the sky, and then head into the Milky Way to the world of the afterlife. The Shasta Indians believe that singing funeral songs help the deceased spirit on its way. Also, according to Shasta traditional lore, the entire region is haunted with Akski, which literally translates to pains. But according to the natives, these are spiritual entities capable of taking on the form of tiny people and animals who live among the area's many boulders, lakes, summits, and also in the rapids and other tributaries of flowing water. The indigenous Shasta peoples consider the Akski to be the cause of all illness, bad luck, and death, and also have the ability to jump into the bodies of unsuspecting victims. According to legend, only a true shaman can exorcise away these demonic entities. In more recent and typical ghost lore, parts of Interstate 5 that run nearby the mountain are reportedly haunted by various unidentified ghosts, possibly the victims of car accidents. Or they may be tulpas or thought forms, brought about by the indigenous people of the area. Some tribes believe that talking about or merely even thinking of certain dark entities can draw them out and cause them to take form. The ruins of Old Shasta Town from the 1800s lie just south of Mount Shasta and west of Redding, California, which at one time was the county seat. The Old Town area is home to several reported ghosts, especially in the old courthouse, which claim that at night the sounds of criminal trials can still be heard, and in the Gallows Park at the back of the courthouse, where those found guilty were hung and still linger to this day. A Pioneer Babies burial spot on nearby old Highway 99, which at one time was a stagecoach road through the area, is claimed to be haunted by a particularly evil and malevolent entity. Some of the stranger stories from the area are based on the Native American legends of Shasta being home to several mysterious races of beings, which include the aforementioned little people, but also tribes of reptilians and large malevolent humanoids known as the Shupchets, who legend says live in the area of Flume Creek and secretly traverse the lava tunnels to the summit of Mount Shasta. The early white settlers in the area also told of the tunnel-traveling giants referring to them as the Lemurians. The concept of Lemuria originally began as a rumored lost continent in the Indian Ocean from a somewhat scientific theory which explained how lemurs were able to migrate to India from Madagascar. Some folks, however, occultists and New Agers in particular, considered Lemuria as a lost continent which was home to an advanced race, the Lemurians, who were the supposed ancestors of the legendary Atlanteans of the other well-known lost continent of Atlantis. Legends state that the Lemurians are giant, human-appearing beings who bore some form of appendage on their massive forehead, which provided them with psychic powers. The story of the Lemurians on Mount Shasta mainly comes from a bizarre book called A Dweller on Two Planets, or The Dividing of the Way, which was written in the 1880s by cultist Frederick Spencer Oliver. Among other things, Oliver claimed that a secret city glittering with jewels was located inside of Mount Shasta, and he further established a connection between it and Lemuria. His writings were popular at the time, and his fantastical ideas of Mount Shasta and Lemuria were referenced and retold in many news articles and other books of that era. Along these lines of legend, there are also stories of a secret society which lives in the secret city deep inside Mount Shasta. The secret society is known as the Great White Brotherhood. Now, that's not because of the color of their skin, but rather the brilliant white light that often surrounds these beings, who also wear spotless white robes. They are said to be a fraternity of spiritually advanced beings, or ascended masters, who are drawn to Mount Shasta due to the energy found on its peak. The Brotherhood allegedly live inside of the mountain and travel through tunnels of gold to their hidden temples made of jewels and crystals. Guy W. Ballard, an occultist from Chicago, ventured to Mount Shasta in 1930 to inquire about reports from another occultist, William Paley, regarding a group of holy men called the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta, whom Paley claimed to have observed while traveling on the mountain. Ballard, along with his wife Edna, was extremely curious and ventured to Mount Shasta in hopes of contacting the ascended masters of which Paley wrote. Once, when Ballard was out on a day hike alone, he paused to rest at a clear mountain spring in the McCloud River Valley area. He claims that while resting by the stream, he was approached by a strange young man who appeared out of nowhere and offered him a drink of some creamy, milky liquid. The young stranger told Ballard that the liquid came from what he called the universal supply. Ballard states that when he drank the liquid, it had an immediate electric and clarifying effect on him, making him feel oddly energized and refreshed. The young stranger then revealed his true name, the Ascended Master Saint Germain, and was suddenly clad in a white, jeweled robe, making him appear godlike. As Ballard looked on in stunned amazement, he noticed that a mountain lion had approached him to within a few feet. Somehow able to fight off his fear of the animal, Ballard claimed that the mountain lion suddenly became as docile and playful as a kitten. At this point, Saint Germain proudly informed Ballard that he had passed the test of courage and gave him 4 small brownish cakes. Ballard ate the cakes and claimed that they further increased the clarity of the liquid he had consumed and aided him in being receptive to the master's teachings. Saint Germain stated that he had searched several continents for someone worthy to learn his instructions regarding the great laws of life, and now Ballard, his wife Edna, and their son Donald were chosen to be his accredited messengers. After a series of meetings with the Ascended Master, Ballard claims he was able to channel Saint Germain's wisdom and plans for implementing the 7th Golden Age, the I Am, which Germain stated would bring about a new age of earthly perfection. Ballard further claimed that through channeling Saint Germain, he was also able to view his own past lives and claimed that he had been George Washington in a previous life. When Ballard returned to Chicago in 1931, he set about putting Saint Germain's plans for the New Age of Enlightenment in motion. By 1932, Ballard and his wife Edna had founded the I Am religious sect, the St. Germain Press, and the St. Germain Foundation. Ballard, using the pseudonym Godfrey Ray King, began turning out books, pamphlets, and articles about his new religion. By 1936, Ballard had amassed a large literary collection of several books, compilation of songs and affirmations, as well as a periodical magazine. Ballard had no problem drawing crowds that came to listen to he and Edna channel St. Germain's teaching, and soon schools and reading rooms began to spring up, and by 1938, the sect had almost 3 million devotees. Skeptics claimed that the new religion was nothing but old, recycled cult practices, and when Guy died in 1939, although his wife Edna claimed that he had not passed on but rather ascended, many of the devoted became disillusioned with Ballard's rather ordinary departure from this plane and stopped attending the meetings. After recovering from alleged mail fraud charges, the I Am movement, although now considerably smaller, survives until this day. The I Am Reading Room in the town of Mount Shasta offers Ballard's channeled writings, Ascended Master and I Am Art, and I Am musical recordings that are purported to alter consciousness and allow for further spiritual enlightenment. The music has been described as having an ethereal, warbling quality that many believe enhances, among other things, psychic abilities and astral travel. The experiences Ballard wrote about in 1930 inspired many other stories of encounters with strange beings on Mount Shasta. In 1932, Edward Lasner claimed he knew of white-robed people who hoarded a cache of gold and lived at the 11,000-foot level. And in 1934, a man named Abraham Mansfield claimed he met a whole tribe of Lemurians on the mountain who revealed to him an extensive network of secret tunnels. 2 decades later, spiritualist Earlene Cheney stated that she received an initiation in a secret temple hidden upon Mount Shasta. Before becoming a spiritual guru, Cheney was a Hollywood starlet, possibly explaining her passion and penchant for the elaborate costumes and theatrics which she used in her New Age church and mystery school, Astara, founded in 1951. Writing in her book, Secrets from Mount Shasta, Cheney tells how she and her husband were given instructions to go to Mount Shasta during a channeling session in 1952. While camping at Panther Meadow, located on the south side at about 7,385 feet, Cheney and her husband suddenly felt led to climb farther up the mountain. During their ascent, they were met by a strange young man who seemed to know all about their quest and proceeded to give them his teachings. Eventually, the pair were escorted into a secret place known as the Cave of the Mystic Circle. It was here that they were also introduced to other adepts, including the Ascended Master Kudhumi, who also assisted them with their teachings. The pair's lessons climaxed in an initiation in which Cheney claimed she was shown the inner Great Temple at the peak of Mount Shasta, which featured what she described as a great astral cathedral lit from above by a glorious star. She further stated that these sights can only be seen by the truly initiated and remain invisible to the eyes of lesser adepts and mere mortals. Cheney has also previously claimed to have been initiated in a secret ceremony inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt, which does make her one of a very few select souls on this plane of existence indeed. Current New Agers and occultists claim that St. Germain and other ascended masters and adepts continue to wander the mountain appearing to seekers, particularly in the area around Panther Meadow. These same occultists will readily explain how the earth is actually hollow and contains numerous secret underground cities, among them Telos, where descendants of ancient Lemuria currently live and are presided over by the Ascended Master High Priest Adama. Mount Shasta is also known for its weird glowing mystery lights. These mysterious floating orbs of light have been reported on the mountain since the arrival of the white settlers and among the Native Americans years prior to that. The best time to observe the lights is usually at dusk, around midnight, and just before dawn. While indigenous tribes of the area thought the lights to be ghosts, New Agers and occultists prefer to think that the lights are from the secret ceremonies of the Lemurians or the Great White Brotherhood. The lights have become so well known that they alone have brought the curious to Mount Shasta. Based on newspaper articles from around the turn of the last century, the lights were observed by passengers on trains that passed by the mountain in the night. The mysterious lights continue to be reported today, and many people have come to associate them with UFO activity that occurs frequently on the mountain. If you would like to perhaps catch a glimpse of these lights without traveling to Mount Shasta, there are live webcams available online which offer 24-hour-day streams of the mountain's peak. There are literally thousands of lava tube caves known to exist on and nearby Mount Shasta. The strangest one is Pluto Cave, which was thought to have been created by a basaltic lava flow almost 200,000 years ago. The tunnel-like cave was sacred to the indigenous tribes of Shasta and was rediscovered by white settlers during the mid-1800s. As it's very foreboding and eerie, it takes its name from the Roman god of the underworld, Pluto. In addition to being called Pluto Cave, it's also known to the locals as Pluto's Cave and Pluto Caves. The cave has garnered quite a reputation in supernatural and occult circles as a place to find extraterrestrials or various entities from the spirit realm that live deep inside the mountain. Recent explorers have reported coming across evidence of sacrificial fires and objects from rituals left behind in the cave by those who've held secret ceremonies and vigils for paranormal or occult purposes. Stories abound of people going insane after spending the night in the cave tube, where they were allegedly confronted by unspeakable horrors. While these tales may be the stuff of wild campfire stories or urban legends, those who have visited the cave do find it frightening and eerie nonetheless. Another strange area located near Mount Shasta is Burney Falls, an amazing natural wonder that pours 129 feet down into Burney Creek in the MacArthur Burney Falls State Memorial Park. President Theodore Roosevelt once remarked that this amazing waterfall should be considered the eighth wonder of the world. There are persistent stories of fairies or fae folk who appear in the mist, or just in the edge of the vision of those who gaze out over the falls. Perhaps these fairies are actually the little people described in Native American legends from around Mount Shasta. It's also stated that these little people will only appear to those who are honestly seeking them for spiritual enlightenment and not just for a paranormal thrill. Burney Falls is located approximately 6 miles north of the junction of Highways 299 and 89 on Highway 229. Fairy sightings have also been reported near the area around McCloud Falls, which is made up of 3 amazing falls flowing into the McCloud River. While the lower and upper falls can easily be accessed by vehicles, the middle falls, reportedly the most haunted, is accessible only on foot. Not surprisingly, the middle of the 3 falls is also claimed to be the best spot for fairy sightings. McCloud Falls is located on Highway 89, approximately 6 miles east of the town of McCloud. Mount Shasta is also considered to be one of the most active hotspots of North America's UFO activity. Those well-versed in extraterrestrials state that Mount Shasta is a prime spot for visiting aliens, and weird lights are often reported hovering near the area at night and have also been spotted disappearing into the mountain. Castle Crags State Park, just south of the town of Dunsmuir, California, along Interstate 5, is also considered to be another active UFO hotspot. The trails in the park lead into strange landscapes of weird, jagged rock formations, and it's the perfect location for encountering anomalous phenomena. While Northern California is full of Bigfoot sightings and encounters, Bigfoot legends seem to be a more modern tale around Mount Shasta. Gigantic humanoid footprints discovered in 1955 at the 11,000-foot level have been said to be those of Bigfoot by some, or of giant Lemurians by others. One of the oddest reports ever to come out of Mount Shasta was in 1962, when a woman claimed to have watched a female Bigfoot give birth high up on the mountain. To this day, New Age seekers, campers, hikers, and even loggers have had sightings of these tall, hairy cryptids on Mount Shasta. Well, there you have it. The strange tale of Mount Shasta. Considering all the paranormal, supernatural, and occult activity that goes on here, perhaps it is no surprise that people have gone missing from the mountain, leaving nary a trace. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we invite you to join us for 5 of the strangest mountain mysteries from around the world. Be sure to listen all the way to the end for a creepy bonus story. Let's begin, shall we? There's just something about the mountains, be it here in the United States or somewhere else on the planet. Perhaps it's the isolation, the solitude, the somewhat overwhelming realization at just how vast and expansive wilderness can be and how small and vulnerable we are in contrast. These true stories from these strange mountain ranges are guaranteed to give you chills. Number 5, the Superstition Mountains in Tonto National Forest, Arizona. The Superstition Mountains are a mountain range located to the east of Phoenix, Arizona, in the Tonto National Forest. The range of mountains is recognized for its breathtaking canyons and beautiful volcanic peak. Its reputation for being spooky precedes it, oftentimes overshadowing its natural beauty. This comes as no surprise, especially considering that this mountain range is believed to have a pretty odd history, which all centers around an alleged hidden treasure, the fabled Dutchman's Mine, a treasure which is responsible for the disappearance and deaths of those who've gone searching for it. Some mysteriously disappear without a trace, while others die in an equally strange fashion. One such person is Adolf Ruth, a person who had a long-standing obsession for locating the fabled Lost Dutchman Mine. He elected to head into the mountain and search for the treasure. However, within a few days, he vanished, never to be seen alive or heard from again. While rescuers found a strange note he had written stating, "P.S. Have found the Lost Dutchman," when his body was found in 1932, things got even more strange. His skull was discovered with a hole made by what Arizona Central reports to be an Army-style .44 caliber revolver. There's been much speculation as to who killed him and why, but no conclusions have been drawn. Then, as recently as 2010, Phoenix News-Times covered the story of Jesse Campen, a 35-year-old man from Denver, Colorado, who vanished in the Superstition Mountains while hunting for the famous treasure. Initially, there were next to no clues which could have identified him. Denver Post reported that his remains were found, quote, wedged in an inaccessible crevice, end quote. Still, even though his body was found, his death remains a mystery. Some believe that he perhaps fell to his death, but once again, this is not conclusive. Despite all the uncertainty surrounding the history of the Superstition Mountains and some of the inexplicable occurrences which have happened there, people generally agree on one thing. Mysterious, eerie, and strange are all descriptions which adequately describe the Superstition Mountains. Time will tell whether any of its great mysteries are ever solved. Number 4. Mysterious Black Mountain National Park in Queensland, Australia. Black Mountain National Park is located in Queensland, Australia. The mountain is famous for strange occurrences such as disappearances, unidentified creatures roaming the mountain at night, and shadowy figures. The most reported one is the ghost of a medicine man standing on the boulders that cover the surface. Stories are told of herdsmen missing with entire herds of cattle, plane compasses disrupted when passing over, and unsuspecting travelers dragged into the mountain by spectral hands. It is also said that animals are often afraid to go near the mountain, with some halting and some attempting to turn around. While this may be caused by the distinctive smell of the mountains, others think that the animals can sense an evil presence and try to stay away. There are also tales of carnivorous mountain chambers that digest anything that wanders into the wrong cave. A large number of locals suspect that the mountain has huge underground caverns that host an alien civilization that built the mountain. This is widely speculated due to the mountain's slightly artificial appearance. Like so many others, this mountain harbors an array of unexplained mysteries, most of which will likely never be solved. However, it may be best not to know the answers, as the truth may be too dark to handle. Number 3. The Valley of Headless Men in Nahanni National Park, Canada. Nahanni National Park, part of the Mackenzie Mountains region in Canada, has become known as the Valley of Headless Men, and with good reason. For thousands of years, the region was said to be evil, with many tribes refusing to settle there. The ones who did told of mysterious creatures inhabiting the vast forests and restless spirits stalking the area. However, the greatest danger is said to be the violent Naha tribe of the mountains. The tribe allegedly consists of deadly warriors who wear masks and armor larger than normal men. These fighters wield strange and unidentifiable weapons. They're also notorious for decapitating their victims. In the 19th century, a whole tribe disappeared without a trace, and many attribute their disappearance to the Naha warriors. Another case was the 1908 disappearance of the McLeod brothers, who were searching for gold in the area. They were both found dead, with their heads missing, along a riverbank. There are a great number of other cases of decapitation in the valley. For example, gold miner Martin Jorgensen's skeleton was found without the skull in his burned-down cabin in 1917. More people have simply gone missing, with 44 unexplained disappearances by 1969. A large number of people also claim to have seen strange lights in the sky, or a huge ape-like man walking among the trees. To this day, there is no explanation for the mysterious goings-on in the Nahanni Valley, and answers unlikely in the foreseeable future, as the region is still largely unexplored. Number 2. The Big Gray Man of Ben Macdui in Cairngorms National Park, United Kingdom. The mountain of Ben Macdui in Scotland is allegedly inhabited by a large gray creature that many refer to simply as the Big Gray Man. The first reports of this beast were in 1925, when a member of Cairngorm Club, who were well-known peak climbers, reported his experience at the summit of the mountain. He stated that he could hear something other than merely the noise of my own footsteps when descending the mountain. I heard a crunch, he said, then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me, but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. This indicates that the creature is bigger than a normal human, meaning that it's Scotland's Yeti. The Cairngorm Club member concluded that there's something queer about the top of Ben Macdui, and will not go back there again by myself. Whatever's on top of Ben Macdui is still out there and still unexplained. Number 1. The Untersberg Portals. Among the Berchtesgaden Alps on the Germany-Austria border lies the Untersberg Mountain. It is one of the most mysterious mountains in the world, with legends of Roman emperors buried deep within its bowels, lost civilizations living in its chasms, and strange beasts prowling its forested surface. Many visitors to the Untersberg have reported missing time and waking up on another part of the mountain. Sometimes the distances involved are incredibly long and could not have been traveled in the time lost. People have suggested that this phenomenon is due to alien abductions, time warps, or portals to other worlds. More logical explanations state that people are ill, dehydrated, or falling into a partial sleep as they walk, which leads them to believe that they have been teleported. The Austrian writer Stan Wolf claims to have gone up the mountain with a friend to search for these time slips. They reported finding areas on the mountain where their watches would run faster or slower than usual. Wolf also claims he found a group of men living in a cave who told him that they were SS soldiers from World War II. They supposedly had not aged and believed that the war had only ended recently. Wolf attributes the time anomalies to black crystals called the Gems of Dominion that were given to a group of Knights Templar by a god. These gems could slow down time and provide answers to secrets. Wolf also believes that many portals to other dimensions are on the mountain, explaining why people go missing up there. Could these far-fetched theories reflect some truth, or are they purely the work of fiction? We may never know. But there is a reason so many strange happenings take place on Untersberg, a reason that may never be understood by humans. And as promised, here's a bonus story for making it to the end of the video. The Creatures of Mount Nyangani. In November 2014, 20-year-old British explorer Thomas Gaisford set out alone to explore Mount Nyangani in Zimbabwe. He had won a university award that funded student trips to remote areas to build confidence. He embarked on the trip alone and planned to reach the summit and stay there overnight. But Gaisford claims a thick fog descended at 3 a.m., leaving him disoriented and lost. Shortly after, heavy rain began to pour. He decided to camp overnight where he was and wait for the peculiar weather to pass. However, in the darkness that surrounded him, Gaisford reported that he had been circled by various creatures that appeared to be observing him. Before he'd set off, the locals had told him to ignore any strangely acting animals as they were not of this world. For 10 hours, he lay there waiting for the fog to clear. When it eventually did, he rapidly left the mountain on foot. What really happened is still unclear. Some say that Gaisford simply became dehydrated and started imagining things. Others believe that he was visited by creatures from another dimension. Perhaps we will never know. Well, there you have it. The strange tales of even stranger occurrences from mountains around the world. If you've enjoyed this video, please let us know in the comments below. We're working on future episodes covering other similar paranormal hotspots from around our haunted planet. In the meantime, stay safe. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.